On a freezing Montana night, a lonely Navy man and his old canine stopped to help a shivering woman with a flat tire on an empty road. She had no one to call, no warm place waiting, and only a few boxes from the life she was trying to rebuild. Beside Silas sat Griggs, a German shepherd still carrying the memory of the handler he had lost. Silas Harrow had spent years believing that caring for someone only meant losing them again. Clara Winslow only wanted one quiet place where her past could stop following her. But when her small tavern became a target, one act of kindness in the snow became something neither of them expected. If this story touches your heart, tell us where you're watching from, leave your thoughts below, and please like and subscribe to help us reach 5,000 subscribers so we can keep writing more stories like this. Snow had a way of making Cedar Hollow look innocent. By daylight, it softened the roofs of the old feed store, hid the rust along the railroad crossing, and laid a clean white hand over every broken fence and abandoned shed. Tourists who came through the Montana Valley in December sometimes called it beautiful. They stopped their cars near the ridge, took pictures of the pines standing black against the mountains, and spoke as if winter had been arranged for them. Silas Boone Harrow knew better. At night, the snow did not decorate. It erased. It swallowed road lines, muffled distance, and made a man feel as if the world had decided to continue without him. He drove through it with both hands on the wheel of his old pickup, shoulders square beneath a dark navy work coat that had seen too many winters to look new and too much use to be thrown away. At 61, Silas still had the build of someone who had spent most of his life carrying weight without asking who had packed it. He stood 6 feet tall, maybe a little over, with broad shoulders and a body made leaner by work, cold weather, and years of sleeping lightly. His face looked carved more than aged, long, spare, with sharp cheekbones, a square jaw, and lines that deepened when he was silent, which was often. His hair had gone salt and pepper, silver, thickest at the temples, clipped short at the sides, but left longer on top so the wind could disorder it. A short, uneven beard shadowed his jaw. His eyes were pale gray blue, not hard in the way people expected from former military men, but steady in a way that made some people look away first. In the passenger seat, Griggs lifted his head from the worn blanket and gave a low breath through his nose. "You're fine," Silas said. The German shepherd blinked at him once, unimpressed. Griggs was 9 years old, big through the chest and shoulders, with a black saddle across his back and deep tan fur along his legs and ribs. His muzzle had begun to silver around the edges. One ear stood clean and sharp, the other carried a small notch near the tip, a remnant from a life before Cedar Hollow. He had the careful stillness of a working dog who had learned that movement should mean something. Silas glanced over. "Don't start with me. Doc said 1 pill with food. You got food." Griggs settled his head again, but his eyes stayed open. On the bench seat between them sat a paper bag from Mabel's Market. 3 cans of chili, a loaf of bread, coffee dark enough to punish a man awake, and a small orange bottle of joint medicine for the dog. Behind the seat, wrapped in a rag, lay Silas's old metal flashlight. It was scratched down to dull silver in places, with the initials MD cut near the cap. Malcolm Dane's initials. Silas did not look at it unless he had to. The road curved past the dark spine of the old rail line. Beyond it, Cedar Hollow thinned into storage sheds, closed businesses, and patches of pine. Farther out, the valley opened toward the mountains, where the wind came down clean and cruel. Silas lived beyond that last stretch of town, in a small cabin with a wood stove, 2 rooms, a leaning porch, and no neighbors close enough to ask questions. It suited him. The fewer people asked, the fewer lies he had to let stand. Not that he had told many truths. On paper, his exit from the Navy had been clean enough to file away. Early separation, operational trauma, no longer recommended for deployment. There had been no conviction, no public disgrace, no dramatic stripping of rank beneath a flag, just a long internal review, a quiet room with men who would not meet his eyes for more than a few seconds, and the name of a dead friend repeated until it stopped sounding like a name. Petty Officer Malcolm Dane. Friend. Handler. Brother in every way that had mattered, though no blood tied them together. Dead in a place Silas still smelled some nights when the wind hit the cabin from the east. People preferred simpler stories. Cedar Hollow had made one for him soon enough. He had left a man behind. He had lost his nerve. He had come home with another man's dog because the dead could not object. Silas had never corrected them. At first, silence had felt like discipline. Later, it became a habit. Then a house. Then a locked room inside the house where he spent most of his days. The only creature with a key was Griggs. Malcolm's dog first, Silas's dog by paperwork, something more complicated by grief. Malcolm had left instructions before the last deployment, the way some men did when they joked too loudly about never needing them. If anything happens to me, Harrow gets Griggs. He'll act like he doesn't want him. Give him the dog anyway. Silas had read that line once, then again, then folded the page until the crease nearly split. He had not wanted Griggs. He had needed him. There was a difference, and it had cost him years to admit it. The pickup's headlights dragged across the snow-packed road. The wipers beat back and forth with a tired scrape. Griggs shifted. Silas noticed before the dog made a sound. The shepherd's ears had lifted. His body had gone still in that old, trained way, every line of him narrowing towards something outside. Silas eased off the gas. What? Griggs did not bark. He stared through the windshield, past the falling snow, toward the bend near the abandoned station road. Silas followed the line of the dog's gaze and saw it then. A faint pulse of amber light, half buried in the white blur. Hazard lights. He slowed the truck. A sedan sat crooked on the shoulder, its rear end too close to the ditch. Dark blue, maybe green beneath the snow, with one tire sagging flat against the rim. The trunk was open. A woman stood beside it with a tire iron in one hand and a jack at her boots, trying to read something by the weak light of her phone. Snow had gathered across her shoulders. Her movements were controlled, but not calm. The kind of controlled a person became when panic had to wait its turn. Silas's foot hovered over the brake. No one else was on the road. That was the problem. He could stop. He could help. He could change a tire, tell her to drive slow, go home, and never see her again. Or he could keep driving. He had spent years learning the shape of that second choice. Not cruelty, not exactly. More like survival with its jaw clenched shut. Other people called small acts of help simple. Silas had once believed that too. Step in, do what you can, pull the man out, hold the line, carry the dog, make the call, stay alive long enough to explain. But life had taught him that stepping in created lines that did not end where you thought they would. A hand offered in the snow could become a face remembered. A face remembered could become a name. A name could become another absence waiting to happen. The woman looked up as his headlights washed over her. She raised one hand, not waving frantically, not begging, just signaling that she was there. Griggs made a sound low in his chest. Silas tightened his grip on the wheel. No. The dog turned his head toward him. It was not a bark, not disobedience. Worse than that. It was recognition. Silas looked back at the road ahead, empty and white. For one long second he saw another night, not snow, but smoke. Not Montana, but a port lit by fire and broken radios. Malcolm's voice cutting through static. Hold position. Keep Griggs back. Do you hear me, Si? Keep the dog back. Silas pressed his thumb hard against the steering wheel seam until the memory thinned. The sedan's hazard lights blinked again. On, off, on, off. A small heartbeat in the snow. Silas cursed under his breath and pulled over. The pickup crunched onto the shoulder behind the sedan. Griggs rose before the engine had fully died. "Stay," Silas said. Griggs stood still, which was not the same as agreeing. Silas pulled on his gloves, took the flashlight from behind the seat, and stepped into the storm. The cold hit the exposed skin around his eyes. Snow moved sideways across the road, thin and fast, the kind that found every opening in a coat. The woman took a step back as he approached. Smart, he thought. Not fearful exactly, but cautious enough to have lived through things. "You all right?" he asked. "I'm not hurt," she said. Her voice was steady, though her hands were shaking. "Just stuck. I thought I knew how to do this." Most people laughed after saying something like that. She did not. Silas shone the flashlight down at the tire. The beam caught a tear in the rubber and the edge of something metallic lodged near the tread. "You hit scrap," he said. "I didn't see it." "You wouldn't have." She looked past him at the truck. Griggs's shape was visible through the passenger window, upright and watching. "Is he friendly?" she asked. "No." The answer came too quickly. Silas heard it himself. The woman nodded once, accepting the boundary without offense. "Fair." That small response told him more about her than a long explanation would have. She did not try to prove she was special, did not crouch and make noises at the dog, did not insist all dogs loved her. Silas pointed at her car. "Sit inside. Keep the heat on." "I can help." "You can keep from freezing." A flash of irritation crossed her face, then vanished. Not submission, calculation. She looked at his hands, his coat, the way he stood against the wind, then at the jack lying uselessly in the snow. "All right," she said, "but I'm not helpless." "I didn't say you were." That seemed to settle something between them, though neither of them smiled. She moved to the driver's seat and left the door partly open. Before Silas could turn back to the tire, Griggs barked once from the truck. "Quiet," Silas called. The dog did not quiet. He pressed his nose to the glass, eyes fixed not on Silas, but on the woman. Silas stared at him. For months after Malcolm died, Griggs had refused strangers completely. He did not lunge, did not snarl without reason. He simply closed himself off with a discipline more painful than aggression. Even Jonah, who gave him scraps of bacon behind Silas's back, had earned only tolerance. Now Griggs watched the woman as if she had stepped into some unseen perimeter. Silas opened the passenger door. "Out! Heel!" Griggs landed in the snow with quiet weight. He came to Silas's left side, then looked immediately toward the sedan. "Don't make me regret this," Silas muttered. The woman saw the dog and went still. Griggs did not approach her. He moved to the space between the sedan and the road, then sat facing the darkness behind them, broad back to the wind, ears lifted, guarding. Not the car, not Silas. Her. Silas felt something tighten beneath his ribs. He turned away before the feeling could name itself. The work took less than 15 minutes and felt longer because of the cold. The lug nuts fought him. The jack sank twice before he found a flatter patch beneath the snow. He used a board from the truck bed to stabilize it, lifted the sedan, swapped the ruined tire for the spare, and tightened everything twice because roads like this punished carelessness. The woman stayed in the car until he motioned for her to turn the wheel slightly. She followed instructions without chatter. Through the open door, Silas noticed boxes stacked in the back seat. Folded linens, a crate of mugs, 2 lamps wrapped in towels, and a paper bag with receipt slips clipped together. Not a tourist, then. Someone arriving. Or trying to. When the spare was on, he lowered the car and stood, flexing his fingers inside the gloves. "That'll get you into town," he said. "No fast driving. No highway if you can avoid it. Spare's not for distance." "I know," she said, though her eyes dropped to the tire as if she had not known until now. "Thank you." He gave a short nod and began gathering the tools. "I mean it," she said. Silas kept his back turned. "Road does worse if you wait." "That's not the same as helping." He had no answer for that. She stepped out of the car, pulling her coat tighter around herself. Up close, she looked younger than he had first thought, and older in the eyes. Mid-30s, maybe. Brown hair tucked under a knit cap, a few strands stuck damp against her cheek. Her face was pale from the cold, but there was a stubborn set to her mouth that made her seem less stranded than delayed. "I'm Clara," she said. "Clara Winslow." Silas closed the trunk over the ruined tire. "Silas." "Silas what?" He looked at her. She lifted both hands slightly. "All right, just Silas." Griggs turned then, snow dusting his black and tan coat. Clara's gaze softened, but she did not reach for him. "And him?" she asked. Silas almost said nothing. The dog saved him from the choice. Griggs took 3 slow steps toward Clara and stopped just out of reach. He lifted his head, studying her with those dark amber eyes. Clara looked to Silas first, asking permission without words. That, too, was different. Silas gave the smallest nod. Clara removed one glove, slowly, carefully. She held her hand low, palm turned slightly inward, not over the dog's head. Griggs leaned forward and smelled her fingers. For a moment, the storm seemed to pull back from the road. Then Griggs stepped closer and allowed her hand to rest against the side of his neck. Silas did not move. Snow collected on his shoulders. His thumb found the old flashlight in his hand and brushed, without thought, across the initials near the cap. M.D. Malcolm had been the last person Griggs trusted that easily. No, not easily, never easily. Clara's expression changed, but not into triumph. She did not coo at the dog or make the moment about herself. She simply bowed her head a little, as if she understood she had been granted something that could not be requested twice. "What's his name?" she asked softly. "Griggs." The dog's ear flicked at the sound. "Hello, Griggs," Clara said. Silas turned away first. He could not stand there and watch another person fit, even for a second, into the empty space grief had left behind. It felt too much like betrayal. Of Malcolm. Of the years he had spent keeping the world at a distance. Of the story he had told himself about being safer when nothing new was allowed to matter. He loaded the jack into the sedan's trunk, then shut it. "You heading into Cedar Hollow?" "Yes, near the old rail buildings." His eyes narrowed slightly, but he did not ask. "I rented a place there," Clara added. "A small one. Needs work." "Everything near the rail line needs work." "That's what I could afford." There was no shame in her voice, only fact. Silas respected that enough not to dress it up. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded bill. "Please take this." "No." "For the trouble." "No trouble." "That's not true." He looked at the money, then at her hand. The fingers were red from cold, nails short, knuckles nicked. Not soft hands, not helpless ones. "Keep it," he said. "Buy a real tire." "I can at least get your coffee sometime." He almost laughed, but the sound never formed. "I've got coffee." "Then dog treats." "That says he's too heavy." Griggs looked back at him with quiet offense. For the first time, Clara smiled. It was small, brief, and tired, but real enough to change her whole face. Silas felt the danger of it immediately. He stepped back. "Drive slow." "I will." He whistled once. Griggs hesitated, only a heartbeat, but Silas saw it. The dog looked from Clara to him, then returned to his side. Obedient, loyal. Still, the hesitation stayed in the snow between them like a footprint neither man nor dog could hide. Silas climbed into the pickup and shut the door. He did not look at Clara as he started the engine. Through the windshield, he saw only the road, the snow, and the thin tunnel made by his headlights. But as he pulled away, his eyes betrayed him and found the rearview mirror. Clara stood beside her sedan beneath the blinking amber lights, one hand resting on the open driver's door. She did not wave wildly or chase his truck with more gratitude. She simply watched him go, small against the white road, steady despite the cold. Griggs turned in the passenger seat to look back too. "Don't," Silas said. The dog kept looking. The pickup rolled past the old rail crossing, its tires grinding over packed snow. Behind him, the hazard lights blinked once more, then stopped as Clara shut them off and got into her car. Silas drove toward the dark edge of town, toward the cabin where no one waited except the wood stove and whatever dreams the night decided to bring. He told himself it had been nothing. A flat tire, a bad road, 15 minutes of work. But the image followed him anyway. A woman alone under snowlight, a dog who had chosen to stand guard without being told, and a small, stubborn warmth in the middle of a winter Silas had thought he knew how to survive. By the time his cabin came into view, he had already decided not to think about her again. That decision lasted less than a mile. Morning made Cedar Hollow look like a town that had never done anything cruel. The storm had passed before dawn, leaving the valley under a clean, bright layer of snow. Roof lines softened beneath it. Pine branches bowed but did not break. Smoke rose from chimneys in thin blue columns, and the main street shone under the hard winter sun as if every window had been polished overnight. Silas Harrow did not trust beautiful mornings any more than he trusted beautiful words. He stood on his porch with a mug of black coffee in one hand, watching Griggs nose through the snow near the steps. The German shepherd moved stiffly at first, his old right hip taking a few careful paces before the warmth of movement settled into him. Then he lifted his head, ears sharp against the pale morning, and looked toward town. "You already had breakfast," Silas said. Griggs kept looking. Silas took a slow drink of coffee. It tasted burnt, which meant it was made correctly. "We're not going sightseeing." The dog's tail moved once. Not quite a wag, more like a decision. Silas stared at him for another few seconds, then sighed and turned back into the cabin for his coat. He told himself the walk was practical. Griggs needed movement. Jonah Pike had ordered a box of ignition coils for 2 snowmobiles, and Silas had promised to stop by the garage to check whether they had arrived. He also needed screws, electrical tape, and a new fuse for the cabin's radio, which had started giving off more static than weather reports. None of that had anything to do with the woman from the road. He repeated that to himself while lacing his boots. By mid-morning, Cedar Hollow had come awake in the slow way of a mountain town. A snowplow scraped along the far end of Main Street, pushing dirty ridges of snow toward the curb. Someone had shoveled a narrow path in front of Mabel's Market. The barber pole outside Klein's shop turned lazily, though Silas had not seen more than 3 men enter that place in a week. Across the street, the hardware store had hung a hand-painted sign in the window. "Ice melt back in stock. Limit 2 bags." Silas walked with Griggs at his left side, the leash loose but not forgotten. He wore his navy work coat over a gray thermal shirt, dark jeans tucked into weathered brown boots, and a wool cap pulled low. His hands were gloved, but he still flexed his fingers now and then. The cold had a way of finding old injuries. People noticed him. They always did. Not dramatically. Cedar Hollow was too polite for that. A woman stepping out of the post office lowered her voice mid-sentence. A man loading firewood into a truck gave Silas a nod that lasted half as long as it should have. Two boys in their 20s outside the diner looked at Griggs first, then at Silas, then away. Silas preferred it that way. Half nods were easier than conversations. The only person who greeted him without measuring the cost was Jonah Pike. Jonah's garage sat near the edge of town, where Main Street bent toward the abandoned rail buildings. It was a low, metal-sided structure with two bay doors, one half open despite the cold. A red shop rag hung from Jonah's back pocket like a flag of surrender to engine grease. At 64, he had the thick hands and permanent frown of a man who trusted machines more than people, because machines at least had the decency to show where they were broken. "You're late," Jonah called from under the hood of a snowmobile. "I didn't know I had a time." "You never do. That's why I make one up." Silas stepped into the garage far enough for the heat to reach his face. Griggs sat just inside the doorway, watching Jonah with the patient tolerance he reserved for men who smelled like oil and bacon. Jonah glanced at the dog. "He looks better." "He's old." "So are we. Doesn't mean we're dead." Silas did not answer. Jonah did not expect him to. The parts had arrived. Silas checked them, signed the receipt, and spent 20 minutes helping Jonah test a starter motor that had no intention of working unless insulted properly. They spoke mostly in fragments: wire gauge, fuel line, loose contact, weather front by Thursday. It was the kind of conversation Silas could stand. Nothing touched blood. Nothing asked for memory. When Silas finally stepped back outside, Griggs was already standing. Not toward home, toward the old rail line. The dog's ears were up again. Silas looked down. "No." Griggs took one step. "Garages is done. We're going home." Another step. Silas followed the dog's gaze past the garage, toward the row of buildings that had once served the train workers, freight men, and travelers who moved through Cedar Hollow before the interstate rerouted most of the town's luck. The old depot still stood at the far end, boarded in places, its roof sagging beneath snow. Beside it ran a short line of storefronts that had been a tailor, a feed office, a cheap cafe, and, years ago, a tavern. Silas had not paid much attention to them. Empty buildings were easy company. They expected nothing. But one of them was not empty anymore. The windows had been washed. Fresh firewood was stacked beneath the awning. A string of small amber bulbs hung inside, unlit in the daytime but visible against the dark wood ceiling. Near the door, a woman stood on a ladder with a wrench in one hand, trying to straighten a weathered sign that read, "The Lantern Rail." Silas stopped. Griggs did not. The shepherd pulled just enough to make the leash tighten, then looked back as if reminding Silas that resistance was childish. Silas should have turned around. Instead, he let the dog lead him across the plowed street. The woman on the ladder braced one boot against the top step and stretched toward the sign bracket. Her coat was thicker than the one she had worn the night before, olive wool with frayed cuffs, and a red brick scarf was wrapped twice around her neck. Her brown hair was tied low, though several strands had escaped and clung to her cheek. Even from a distance, Silas recognized the set of her shoulders, tired, determined, unwilling to ask for help until the ladder collapsed beneath her. Clara Winslow. She looked down when Griggs's paws crunched onto the snow near the steps. For half a second, surprise opened her face. Then warmth followed. Not bright enough to be careless, but real. "Well," she said, looking at Griggs first. "Good morning." Griggs stepped to the base of the stairs and sniffed the bottom rail. Silas stopped a few feet back. "Sign's crooked." Clara looked up at the sign, then back at him. "I was hoping it had character." "It has gravity." That got a small laugh out of her. Not the polite kind. It escaped before she could dress it properly. Silas regretted liking the sound. "I was going to fix it," she said. I can see that. And I was not going to fall. I didn't say you were. You have a way of not saying things loudly. Silas looked at her then. She was not angry. Not exactly. There was humor in her face, but guarded humor, like a lantern turned low. Griggs climbed the first step and sat. Clara glanced at him. He seems to have an opinion. He usually does. Is his opinion that my sign is crooked too? Probably. Clara looked down at the dog and gave him a solemn nod. Noted. Silas felt the corner of his mouth threaten to move and stopped it. The tavern door opened before he could decide whether to leave. A woman in a flour-dusted apron stepped out, carrying a tin box against her hip. She was short, round through the middle, and quick in the eyes. Her silver hair was cut to her jaw and pinned back on one side with a clip shaped like a leaf. She wore a purple cardigan under her coat, as if she had dressed for warmth and battle at the same time. Clara, if you crack your skull before opening day, I'm not dragging your body inside, she said. I've got dough rising. Clara sighed. Good morning to you too, Edith. The older woman looked at Silas, then at Griggs, then back at Silas. Her expression sharpened with recognition, but not fear. Harrow. Mrs. Palmer. Don't Mrs. Palmer me. Makes me sound dead. Silas said nothing. Edith Palmer owned the bakery next door, a narrow place with blue trim and windows that smelled like butter every morning. Her husband had died years ago, and since then she had run the shop as if grief were best managed by feeding people who claimed they were not hungry. Silas had spoken to her maybe 4 times. Each time she had behaved as if his silence was rude but survivable. Edith lifted the tin box toward Clara. Bacon rolls. Too ugly to sell. Clara gave her a look. They're never too ugly to sell. They offended me aesthetically. Thank you. Don't thank me. Pay me someday when you're rich and impossible. Edith turned to Silas again. You fixing that sign or standing there judging it? Silas looked at Clara. You got a wrench? She held it up. 5 minutes later, Silas was on the ladder. He did not remember agreeing. That bothered him. The metal bracket had loosened where old screws had chewed the wood soft. He tested the board with his thumb, then looked down. This needs backing. I have scrap wood inside, Clara said. Dry? Mostly. That means no. She crossed her arms. I'm learning there are many kinds of no in Montana. There's only one. People just dress it up. Edith snorted. He's not wrong. Griggs had moved to the threshold of the tavern and stood looking in. Clara noticed. You can come inside, she told the dog. If Silas says it's all right. Silas climbed down from the ladder. He doesn't need an invitation. But Griggs did not enter until Silas gave a short nod. The shepherd stepped over the threshold and paused. Silas followed, meaning only to retrieve the scrap wood and leave. The inside of the lantern rail surprised him. He had expected stale beer, warped floors, maybe the sour smell of a building closed too long. Instead, the room smelled of pine boards, coffee grounds, old brick warming near the stove, and something savory simmering in a pot somewhere behind the bar. The space was small, but not cramped. A few newly sanded tables lined one wall. The bar had been cleaned and oiled until the wood showed a deep amber grain. Above it hung the same name as outside, painted by hand in cream letters on a dark board. The Lantern Rail. Not fancy, not polished enough to impress people who needed impressing, but it had care in it. That was worse. Care made places vulnerable. Clara came in behind him, brushing snow from her sleeves. It isn't finished. Silas looked at the old stove. Flue inspected? Last week. By who? Caldwell Heating. Mina knows what she's doing. I hoped so. She scared me into buying 2 carbon monoxide detectors. Good.
Clara's mouth softened. That sounded almost like approval. It was about the detectors. Of course. Griggs moved through the room slowly, nose working. He sniffed near the stove, the legs of the tables, the door behind the bar. Then he circled back and sat near the front window where he could see both the entrance and the street. Silas saw it. So did Clara. Neither of them mentioned it. For a moment, the room changed around the dog. It stopped being a project and became a place under watch. Clara walked behind the bar and lifted a folded cloth from a crate. I've been here almost 2 months, she said, as if answering a question Silas had not asked. The tire last night was bad timing. I was bringing back the last of the mugs and some paperwork from Livingston. You opening soon? If the sign doesn't fall on anyone, yes.
Brave business choice. A tavern? In this town? She looked at him carefully. You don't like Cedar Hollow? I live outside it. That's not an answer. It's the one I've got. Clara accepted that, too. She seemed to have a talent for not prying at locked doors. Silas disliked how much he noticed it. Edith leaned against the bar, opening her tin. The smell of bacon and warm bread filled the room. She's calling it a winter tavern, Edith said, not a bar. Don't make that face, Harrow. There's a difference. I didn't make a face. You thought one. Clara took a roll from the box and set it on a napkin. Coffee, soup, simple food, local whiskey for people who want it. A warm place by the rail line. That's the idea. Silas looked around again. There were no neon beer signs, no television over the bar shouting sports scores to men avoiding home. No sticky floor. No row of cheap bottles displayed like promises.
On a shelf near the stove sat stacked bowls, chipped but clean. A folded blanket lay on one bench. A small chalkboard leaned against the wall with unfinished handwriting. Hot soup, coffee after dark, no questions required. Silas read the last line twice. No questions required. Something in his chest reacted before he could stop it. He thought of his cabin at night, of the way silence could be peaceful until it became a verdict. He thought of men in review rooms asking questions they did not want answered. He thought of Malcolm's name in official ink. He thought of Griggs, standing between a stranger and the road, as if the dog had understood something Silas had spent years refusing to understand. A place where no questions were required sounded harmless. It was not. It was an invitation. And invitations, Silas had learned, were dangerous things. Outside, a truck rolled by, slowly. Tires crushed snow near the curb. A man in a camel-colored coat sat behind the wheel, clean-shaven, hair neat, one hand resting at the top of the steering wheel. He did not stop, but he looked toward the tavern long enough that Clara's shoulders tightened. Edith noticed, too. That man circles more than a vulture, she muttered. Clara busied herself with the cloth in her hands. It's just Travis. Just Travis, Edith repeated, making the words taste rotten. That's what people said about mold before ceilings fell in. Silas looked toward the window. The truck had continued down the street toward the town offices. Travis Morrow? He asked. Edith's eyes flicked toward him. You know him? I know the name. He wants this whole row, Edith said. Depot, old feed office, this place. Maybe my bakery if he finds a way to pretend he's doing me a favor. Says investors love rustic charm, as long as actual rustic people aren't standing in front of it. Clara's jaw tightened. He made an offer. I said no. Silas looked at her. You have a lease? 3 years, signed, filed. Good. Edith gave him a dry look. Listen to him. That's the sound of a man trying not to care and failing in legal terms. Silas ignored her. Clara did not. Her eyes came to him, quiet and measuring.
Not asking for rescue. That mattered. If she had asked, he might have had an excuse to leave. Instead, she only stood there in the half-finished room, holding a flour-dusted bacon roll in one hand, her scarf bright against the old wood. Trying to build a business in a town that had already begun deciding whether she was allowed to belong. The moment stretched. Then Silas looked away first. "I need backing wood," he said. Clara blinked once, then nodded toward the storage room. "Left side, behind the crate of mugs." He fixed the sign. It took longer than it should have because the old wood had weathered badly, and the bracket needed new screws. Clara held the ladder once, though Silas did not need her to.
Edith stood below, offering unwanted advice with the confidence of someone who had never installed anything heavier than a pie shelf. Griggs remained inside by the window, visible through the glass, watching the street. When Silas climbed down, the sign sat level. Clara stepped back to look at it. The winter sun caught the faded paint and made the old letters glow faintly. The lantern rail. "It looks better," she said. "It'll hold." "That's better than looking better." He handed her the wrench. "Usually." She smiled again, but this time it carried less surprise, as if she had decided he was not friendly exactly, but possibly safe in small amounts. That was dangerous too. Silas brushed snow from his gloves and whistled for Griggs. The dog came out reluctantly, pausing once at the threshold before stepping down beside him. Clara noticed. "He likes it. He likes warm rooms. Don't we all?" Silas had no answer that would not reveal too much. From the direction of the town offices, the camel-coated man's truck passed again, slower this time. Edith's face hardened. Clara pretended not to see, which told Silas she had seen very clearly. "Take care of your lease papers," he said. Clara looked at him. "I do." "Make copies." "I have." "Off-site." That made her pause. Edith pointed a finger at Clara. "He's right. I hate when that happens, but he is." Clara gave a short, thoughtful nod. "I'll do it today." Silas told himself that was enough. He had fixed the sign. He had offered one piece of practical advice. That was not involvement. That was not attachment. A man could advise a stranger to copy lease papers and still remain outside the story. He started down the street toward Jonah's garage. Griggs walked beside him, but every few steps the dog turned his head back toward the lantern rail. Silas kept his eyes forward until they reached the corner near the hardware store. Then he looked. Clara stood beneath the sign, one hand shielding her eyes from the brightness off the snow. Edith was beside her with the empty tin box tucked under one arm. Behind them, through the clean front window, the amber bulbs hung waiting to be lit. A woman new to town, a tavern not yet open, an old rail building that men with money had already marked for their plans. Silas felt irritation rise in him, sharp and unwelcome. At Travis Morrow, though the man had done little in front of him. At Edith, for speaking plainly enough that he could not pretend not to understand. At Clara, for standing there with that stubborn little sign as if a lease and a few bowls of soup could hold back a town's appetite. But mostly at himself. Because the feeling beneath the irritation was not suspicion. It was not even pity. It was concern. Silas Boone Harrow had spent years training himself not to care where the world placed its weight, as long as it did not land on his porch. Yet that morning, under a sky so bright it hurt to look at, he found himself worrying about a woman he had met less than 12 hours ago, and a tavern that smelled like pine, coffee, and unfinished hope. Griggs leaned lightly against his leg. Silas looked down. "Don't get used to it." The shepherd looked back toward the lantern rail. Silas resumed walking, slower than before. Behind him, the sign stayed level in the snowlight. By the time the lantern rail opened its doors, Cedar Hollow had already formed an opinion. That was how small towns worked. They made weather out of whispers. A woman could spend 2 months sanding tables, filing permits, patching old walls, buying soup pots, and learning which window leaked when the wind came from the west, and still most people would decide they knew her before she poured a single cup of coffee. Clara Winslow knew this. She had known it in other towns under other names, in rented rooms and late-night diners and offices where men looked at her application too long after recognizing something in her face. She had learned that people liked redemption better when it stayed abstract. They praised second chances in church bulletins and holiday speeches, then stepped back when someone actually tried to take one. Still, on opening night, she lit every lamp. The lantern rail glowed against the snow like a match cupped in both hands. Outside, winter pressed itself to the windows, dark and blue and sharp. Snow fell lightly, not in the wild, sideways sheets of the storm that had stranded her on the road weeks earlier, but in slow, silver flakes that caught the light above the porch. Inside, the tavern smelled of beef soup, fresh bread, coffee, wood smoke, and old pine warmed for the first time in years. The stove gave off a steady heat. Edith Palmer's bacon rolls sat beneath a cloth on the bar, though Edith insisted they were structurally imperfect and therefore unsuitable for respectable bakery customers. A small chalkboard near the door listed the night's offerings in Clara's careful hand. Hot soup, coffee after dark, bacon rolls, local whiskey. No questions required. Clara had almost erased the last line twice. Each time she had stopped herself. It was the truest thing in the room. She moved behind the bar in a white cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled to her elbows, a honey-brown canvas apron tied at her waist, and her hair pinned low at the back of her neck. The old brass clip she wore kept slipping, letting a few strands fall against her cheek. Her hands shook once when she reached for the first clean glass. She set it down, breathed, and picked it up again. "Stop looking like you're awaiting execution," Edith said from a stool near the end of the bar. Clara turned. "Is that your official customer service advice?" "My official advice is to charge more for soup. My personal advice is to breathe before you scare the paying people." "You haven't paid." "I brought rolls." "That's not money." "It's better. Money doesn't smell like bacon." Clara almost smiled, and that was enough to steady her. The first customers arrived before 6. 2 snowplow drivers came in, stamping snow off their boots, their faces red from wind and salt. A woman from the post office ordered coffee and sat near the stove with her gloves in her lap. Jonah Pike appeared 15 minutes later, smelling faintly of oil and cold metal, and claimed a table by the wall, as if he had been sitting there every winter for 20 years. "Coffee," Jonah said when Clara came over. "Black?" "Don't ruin it." "That sounds like black." He grunted, which she accepted as conversation. Then came a pair of truckers who had seen the porch lights from the road, a young couple who worked at the ski rental shop, and 3 older men who seemed less interested in soup than in determining whether the new woman had painted over the old tavern's mistakes properly. Clara greeted all of them the same way. Warm, but not pleading. Kind, but not eager enough to be handled. She had promised herself that. No begging a town to let her belong. Near 7, the door opened and the room changed before Clara even looked up. Griggs entered first. The German shepherd stepped across the threshold with the composure of someone inspecting a perimeter. Snow dusted his black saddle and silvering muzzle. His notched ear flicked toward the stove, then the bar, then the back hallway. Only after that did Silas Harrow come in behind him. Silas paused just inside the door, as if the warmth had caught him by surprise. He wore the same dark navy work coat, though brushed cleaner, with a charcoal Henley underneath. His hair was wind-tossed, his short beard rough with silver. He did not scan the room like a tourist. He mapped it. Front door, back door, windows, stove, people, exits. Clara saw it because she had spent much of her own life mapping rooms too. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Edith, of course, ruined it. "Don't stand there letting the heat out, Harrow. This isn't a barn." Silas shut the door. A few people looked over. One of the older men near the wall leaned toward another and murmured something. Clara saw Silas hear it, and choose not to hear it. Griggs walked to the front window, circled once, then settled near the wall where he could see the entrance and the bar. Silas chose the corner table closest to him, the one that gave him a view of both doors. Clara filled a bowl with water and carried it over. "For him," she said, setting it near Griggs. The shepherd looked at Silas. Silas nodded once. Only then did Griggs lower his head to drink. Clara kept her voice light. "Coffee or whiskey?" Silas looked at the bar, then at the stove, then at the room full of people pretending not to notice him. "Whiskey." "Neat?" "Small." She brought him a modest pour in a heavy glass, not the generous kind meant to impress a man into ordering another. He noticed. His fingers closed around the glass, but did not lift it right away. "Place looks different," he said. "Different good, or different expensive mistake?" "Different warm." The words were plain. For Clara, they landed with more force than praise. "Thank you," she said. He gave a short nod and looked away before the moment could ask for more. The night settled into something close to hope. The couple from the ski shop ordered a second bowl of soup to share. Jonah complained that the coffee was nearly acceptable, which Edith announced was the closest he had come to poetry in 20 years. The snowplow drivers argued over whether the storm front would hit Thursday morning or Thursday night. Someone put a few dollars in the small jar by the old radio, and country music crackled softly through the room, low enough that people could still hear each other. Clara moved from table to table, taking orders, clearing bowls, refilling mugs. She made mistakes. She forgot one spoon. She overfilled a coffee cup and burned her thumb. The register drawer stuck twice. But each problem was ordinary, blessedly ordinary. The kind of trouble a woman could fix without losing a piece of herself. At one point, she looked toward Silas's table and found Griggs watching her. Not begging, not restless, just watching. Silas noticed too. He followed the dog's gaze, then looked down into his glass as if it had accused him of something. Clara turned away before he could see her smile. The door opened again at 8:17. The room did not fall silent all at once. It happened in layers. First, the snowplow drivers stopped arguing. Then Jonah's mug paused halfway to his mouth. Edith's eyes narrowed. The old radio kept playing, cheerful and unaware. Travis Morrow stepped inside with two men behind him. He had dressed for the weather without appearing touched by it. A camel-colored wool coat, leather gloves, polished boots with only the thinnest trace of snow at the sole. His dark hair was combed neatly, his jaw freshly shaved, his smile practiced to look friendly from across a room and colder up close. The men with him were less polished. One was broad and red-faced, with a shaved head and a thick neck pressing against his collar. The other was lean, restless, and too quick with his eyes. They were not dressed like street thugs. That would have been too easy. They looked like men hired to carry heavy things, block doorways, and claim later that they had only been standing there. Travis removed one glove finger by finger. "Clara," he said, warmly enough for strangers to misunderstand. "Opening night. I would have sent flowers if I'd known you'd truly go through with it." Clara wiped her hands on her apron. "You knew." "I hoped you'd reconsider." "Then you hoped wrong." Edith made a sound into her coffee. Travis's smile did not move. "Mrs. Palmer, always a pleasure." "Is it?" Edith asked. He let that pass. Clara came around the end of the bar, placing herself between Travis and the customers without seeming to. Silas saw the movement. So did Griggs. The dog lifted his head but stayed down. "Can I get you coffee?" Clara asked. "Not tonight." Travis glanced around the room as if inspecting a property after a flood. "You've done something with it." "Thank you." "I didn't say it was a compliment." The lean man behind him chuckled. A few customers looked into their bowls. That was the first wound of the night, Clara thought. Not the insult itself. The way decent people studied their soup when they heard it. Travis walks toward the bar. "I wanted to stop in and congratulate you. Also to remind you that my offer still stands." "This is not the time." "On the contrary. Before a business gathers debt, reputation, habits, before things become difficult, that's exactly the time." "My lease is not for sale." "All leases are for sale. Some people are just slow to learn the number." Clara felt heat rise in her face, but kept her voice level. "If you're not ordering, I need you to let paying customers enjoy their evening." The broad man looked around. "This crowd?" Jonah's chair scraped faintly. Silas did not move. That bothered him. His body had gone still the moment Travis entered, not from fear, from calculation. The old part of him had counted 3 men, 2 doors, 1 heavy glass in his hand, distance to Clara, distance to Griggs, distance to the man with restless eyes. He hated how easily the room became a map. He hated more that he was still sitting. "This is not yours," he told himself. He had fixed a sign, that was all. He had given advice about lease copies, that was all. Clara was not his responsibility because she had once touched Griggs gently in the snow. A warm room did not make a man part of it. But then Travis leaned closer to Clara, lowering his voice just enough to pretend discretion. "I know more than you think," he said. Clara did not step back. "I doubt that." "You should. Doubt can save embarrassment." The door opened behind him before Clara could answer. Mary Ann Vale entered with a gust of cold air and the scent of expensive perfume. She wore a pearl gray coat, a pale blue silk scarf, and a silver snowflake pin at her lapel, the emblem of the Cedar Hollow Winter Tourism Council. Her blonde gray bob sat perfectly against her jaw. She carried herself like a woman accustomed to turning rooms without raising her voice. "Travis," she said, as if surprised to find him there. "I thought that was your truck outside." Silas watched Clara's fingers tighten around the towel in her hand. Mary Ann looked at the room, then at Clara, then smiled with a careful softness that did not reach her eyes. "Miss Winslow, I wanted to wish you luck. Cedar Hollow values new energy, when it aligns with the character of the town." Edith muttered, "There it is." Mary Ann continued as if she had not heard. "Families come here for a certain kind of winter experience. Safe, wholesome, rooted. I'm sure you understand how important reputation is in a place this small." Clara's throat tightened. She could handle crude men. Crude men announced themselves. They came with bad breath and worse hands, and at least the danger wore its real face. Mary Ann was different. Mary Ann wrapped cruelty in civic concern and made it sound like a brochure. "I understand reputation," Clara said. Travis smiled. "Do you?" The lean man drifted toward the bar, close to the stack of lease papers Clara had been reviewing earlier between orders. Clara had meant to take them upstairs to the small room she rented in back. She had not yet done it. Silas saw her notice the papers. He also saw the man notice her noticing. The country song on the radio ended. For 3 seconds, the room had no music, only the stove ticking and the wind touching the windows. Then the lean man bumped the table nearest him with his hip. A tray of clean glasses tipped and crashed to the floor. The sound cracked through the tavern. Clara flinched. The man lifted both hands. Accident. No one believed him. Griggs stood.
Silas put 2 fingers lightly against the edge of the table. Not a command, but enough. Griggs held in place, trembling with restraint. Clara moved toward the broken glass.
Leave it. I'll clean it.
No trouble, the lean man said, stepping closer to the bar instead of away from the mess.
Place like this ought to get used to things breaking. Travis's expression remained politely disappointed, as if all this were unfortunate but beyond his control. Marianne turned to a couple near the stove. You see what I mean about management concerns? Something in Clara changed. Not visibly enough for the room to notice, but Silas saw it. Her face did not crumble. It closed. Her eyes went flat with a kind of practiced endurance that made him think of people waiting for a blow they had learned not to dodge, because dodging made it worse. The lean man reached toward the papers on the bar. Clara moved fast, catching them first. He caught her wrist. It was not a violent grab at first. That was the point. Just enough pressure to claim he had not meant harm, just enough ownership to make every woman in the room understand. Silas heard his own heartbeat once, heavy. Then Griggs growled. The sound was low, old, and final. Every head turned. Griggs had not lunged. He stood beside Silas's table, black and tan body rigid, notched ear forward, eyes fixed on the man's hand around Clara's wrist. The growl did not fill the room by volume. It filled it by meaning. Silas rose, slowly. The chair did not scrape. His glass remained untouched on the table. Let go, he said. The man looked at him, then at Griggs. Mind your dog, old man. Let go. Travis lifted a hand. No need for drama. Silas did not look at Travis. Tell him. A smile tugged at the broad man's mouth. Or what? Silas stepped forward, stopping just outside arm's reach. His voice stayed quiet. Or this becomes simple. The lean man tightened his grip on Clara, perhaps because he felt the room slipping away from him and needed to hold something. Clara's face had gone pale, but she did not cry out. Silas moved. Not like a man trying to prove he was still dangerous, not like a man performing old violence for a room. It was smaller than that, cleaner. He caught the man's wrist, turned it just enough to break the grip, and guided the arm down and back until pain bent the man at the knees. No punch, no thrown body, no shattered table, only control, applied with the economy of someone who knew exactly how much force was required and hated that he knew. Clara stepped free. Griggs moved once, placing himself between her and Travis. That was when Roy Kessler stood. He had been sitting near the far wall, a broad-shouldered trucker in a denim jacket lined with fleece, with a weather-burned face and calm eyes that suggested long hours alone behind a windshield. He held his phone up, recording. Got most of that, Roy said. The broad man stopped smiling. Edith had already moved behind the bar and picked up the phone. Harlem Pierce is on his way, she announced, unless he slides into a ditch, which would be the most useful thing he's done this week. Marianne's face tightened just for a moment. Travis looked around the room and understood what men like him always understood best. Exposure. Not morality, not shame. Exposure. Silas released the man's wrist and stepped back. The lean man stumbled, swearing under his breath. Travis smoothed his coat with gloved hands. This is unfortunate. No, Clara said. Her voice surprised everyone, including herself. She stood with the lease papers pressed against her chest, her wrist red where the man had held her. Her eyes shone, but her voice did not break. What's unfortunate is that you came here thinking I would be too ashamed to make a scene. Travis's smile disappeared. The room held its breath. Clara continued, softer now, but clear. I am not selling my lease tonight. Marianne said,
No one is asking you to decide under pressure. Edith barked a laugh. Travis stepped toward the door. His men moved with him, the lean one still flexing his wrist. At the threshold, Travis turned just enough for Clara to hear him. "Winter is long in Cedar Hollow," he said. "Longer for people without friends." Then he opened the door and let the cold in. Marianne left after him, slower, preserving dignity like a coat she refused to remove. The door closed. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then sound returned, badly. A spoon touched a bowl. Someone coughed. The old radio started another song, too cheerful and too late. Clara stared at the broken glass on the floor, as if she could not remember what it was. Customers began leaving. Not all at once. That might have looked cruel.
They did it politely, with murmured excuses about early mornings, road conditions, children at home, trucks to start before dawn. The couple from the ski shop left money on the table and avoided Clara's eyes. The post office woman squeezed Clara's shoulder but said nothing, which was almost worse. Jonah stayed longest among them, standing near the door with his cap in his hands. He looked at Silas, then Clara. "You need boards for that back step. I got scrap," he said. Clara nodded, unable to answer. Roy came to the bar. "I'll keep the video," he said, "if you need it." "Thank you," Clara managed. He nodded once and left. Soon the lantern rail was almost empty. The warmth remained, but it had changed. The soup still simmered. The lamps still glowed. The stove still ticked. Yet the room felt bruised, as if the walls themselves had heard too much and did not know how to hold it. Edith stood by Clara. "Honey, please don't," Clara whispered. Edith closed her mouth. It was the first time Silas had seen the older woman obey silence. Clara set the lease papers under the bar, then crouched near the broken glasses. She reached for a large shard with bare fingers. "Don't," Silas said. She froze. He took the broom from beside the stove and began sweeping. No speech, no comfort dressed as wisdom. He did not tell her Travis was wrong, though he was. He did not tell her people would come around because he did not know if they would. He did not tell her she was brave because that word sometimes felt like a way of asking wounded people to keep bleeding politely. He swept glass into a pile. Griggs lay near the door, head up, watching the street through the lower pane of the window. Clara stood slowly. For a while, she watched Silas work. Then she took a cloth and began wiping spilled whiskey from the floorboards. Her movements were careful at first, then rougher. One tear fell, then another. She turned her face away as if offended by them. "I'm not crying because of him," she said. Silas kept sweeping. "I didn't ask." "I hate that people think tears mean they won." "They don't." The answer came out before he could stop it. Clara looked at him. Silas lowered the broom. His pale eyes stayed on the glass at his boots. "Sometimes it just means something hurt." The words sat between them, plain and unadorned. Clara's shoulders shook once. She pressed the cloth hard against the floorboards and breathed through it until the shaking passed. Edith quietly gathered bowls from the tables. She did not fuss. That was her mercy. Together the four of them cleaned the room. Clara, Edith, Silas, and Griggs keeping watch as if the door still mattered. No one called it help. No one called it friendship. The names would have made it fragile. When the last shard had been swept up, Silas carried the dustpan to the trash behind the bar. Clara took it from him. Her eyes were red, but she stood straight. "You didn't have to stay," she said. Silas looked toward the front window, where snow moved through the porch light. "Glass cuts paws." Griggs huffed from the door as if accepting the explanation on technical grounds only. Clara gave the smallest smile, broken at the edges. "Then thank you," she said, "for protecting his paws." Silas almost answered. Instead, he picked up his untouched whiskey from the corner table, carried it to the bar, and set it down. "I didn't drink it." "I noticed." "Put it on my tab." "You don't have a tab." He looked around the damaged, warm, stubborn room. "Start one." Clara did not say anything for a moment. Then she reached beneath the bar, took out her green cloth-bound notebook, and opened to a clean page. Her hand trembled only slightly as she wrote his name. Silas Harrow. Under it she wrote, "Small whiskey." The amount did not matter. They both knew it. At the door, Griggs rose. Silas put on his gloves. Edith pretended to busy herself with the empty roll tin. Clara stood behind the bar with the notebook still open. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, the lantern rail was quieter than it had been at the start of the night, but its lights were still on. Silas stepped out into the cold with Griggs beside him. Behind him, Clara did not lock the door right away. The lantern rail stayed open after opening night. That, Clara decided, was the first victory. Not a triumphant one, not the kind people noticed or applauded. It looked like unlocking the front door at 4 in the afternoon with swollen eyes, lighting the stove, setting soup to warm, wiping tables that no one might sit at, and writing the day's menu on the chalkboard with a hand that had learned not to tremble in public. Hot soup, coffee after dark, bacon rolls. No questions required. The last line had begun to feel less like a welcome and more like a dare. Cedar Hollow had questions now, plenty of them. But most people did not bring those questions to Clara's face. They carried them through the grocery store, the post office, the diner, the church basement where holiday wreaths were being sorted for the town square. They lowered their voices just enough to pretend they were being decent. Some said she had been a call girl in Spokane. Others said she had run from debt, or from a man, or from the police, depending on who wanted the story to taste sharper. By the end of the week, Clara had apparently stolen money from an elderly client, ruined a marriage in Idaho, and come to Cedar Hollow to turn the old rail district into a den of sin. She heard pieces of it because people wanted her to. A woman at Mabel's Market stopped talking when Clara reached for coffee filters, then restarted the conversation too soon, loud enough for the word "that kind" to land between shelves of canned peaches and flour. A man who had eaten soup on opening night crossed the street rather than pass her on the sidewalk. Someone left a folded church pamphlet under the tavern door with a verse circled in blue ink. Clara threw that one into the stove. Then she felt guilty for wasting paper. Edith Palmer arrived every morning anyway. She came through the front door with a tin box balanced against one hip, cheeks red from the cold, apron dusted with flour beneath her coat. Each day she gave Clara the same lie in a different coat. "Made too many. These came out lopsided. Customer complained one looked judgmental. Bacon rolls don't keep. Tragic, really." Clara accepted them because refusing would only make Edith louder. Jonah Pike came twice in the first week, ordered coffee, drank it without saying whether it was good, and left money under the saucer. On the second visit, he brought a scrap board and fixed a loose strip near the back step without asking. When Clara thanked him, he grunted. "Tripping lawsuits are bad for business," he said. "What business?" He looked around the empty room. Exactly. Roy Kessler passed through on a Thursday afternoon with another trucker named Ben, both of them smelling of diesel and highway air. Roy ordered soup, coffee, and 3 bacon rolls to go. He did not mention the video from opening night unless Clara did. She did not. But when he left, he said, "Told a couple drivers this place is worth stopping." Clara looked down at the counter. "That was kind of you." Roy adjusted the brim of his cap. "Road's long. Warm places matter." Then he was gone, leaving wet boot prints near the door and the first ordinary kindness of the week that did not feel like pity. Still, most evenings were quiet. Too quiet. The lantern rail had been built for voices. Clara could tell by the way sound behaved in the room. The old wood seemed to wait for conversation. The bar, polished and warm beneath her palm, looked wrong with only 1 or 2 cups on it. Sometimes after Edith left and before the rare customer arrived, Clara stood behind the counter and listened to the stove tick, the refrigerator hum, and the wind moving under the eaves like someone deciding whether to come in. On the 5th evening after opening night, Silas returned. Not at 6, when a person might come for dinner. Not at 7, when a person might come for company. He arrived after 8, when the street outside had gone dark and the tavern had only one customer, an old man nursing coffee near the stove while pretending to read a week-old newspaper. Griggs came in first, as usual, his black and tan coat dusted with snow. He crossed to the front window, made a slow inspection of the room, then settled near the door. Silas followed, carrying a small canvas tool roll. Clara watched him from behind the bar. "Something broken?" she asked. "Back hinge squeaks." "It does?" "Yes." "I own the building and didn't know that." "You hear customers. I hear hinges." The old man lowered his newspaper just enough to look at Silas, then raised it again. Silas removed his gloves, stepped to the back door, and worked for 7 minutes without further explanation. He tightened 2 screws, added oil to the hinge, opened and closed the door 3 times, then looked unsatisfied and tightened 1 more. Clara set a mug of coffee on the nearest table. "I didn't order that," he said. "It's not whiskey." "That doesn't answer anything." "It answers enough." He looked at the mug, then at her, then sat down. That became the pattern. Silas came near closing, never at the same exact time. Once he checked an outlet behind the bar because the lamp flickered when the freezer kicked on. Once he examined the old stovepipe from the inside and told Clara to call Mina Caldwell before the next deep freeze. Once he replaced a cracked latch on the supply closet with one he claimed he had lying around. Clara did not call it help. Silas did not call it concern. Griggs treated the tavern as if it had been added to a route only he understood. He lay by the door with his head on his paws, but whenever someone unfamiliar stepped inside, his eyes opened before the bell finished ringing. He did not growl. He did not need to. He simply watched until the room settled again. One night, a man Clara did not recognize came in, saw the dog, looked at Silas, and left without ordering. Silas said nothing. Clara said, "I suppose that's one way to improve the clientele." The corner of Silas's mouth moved. Not a smile, but something close enough to make Clara turn away before he could take it back. Winter deepened that week. The mornings brightened hard and white, and the evenings arrived early, blue shadows folding into the rail district before Clara had finished chopping onions. Snow piled along the alley behind the tavern. The cold found a weak seam near the storeroom door and worried at it until the back wall began to dampen. Clara discovered the problem near closing on a night when flakes fell thick and slow beyond the windows. She had gone into the storeroom for a sack of flour and found one corner of the floor dark with moisture. A draft slipped through the warped back frame, carrying the smell of wet wood and old dust. "Oh no," she whispered. Silas, who had been sitting at the bar with untouched coffee, looked up. "What?" "Nothing." He was already standing. Clara closed her eyes briefly. "That means it is something, but I wanted a moment to lie to myself first." Silas came to the storeroom doorway. Griggs rose and followed. The room was narrow, lined with shelves of canned goods, spare mugs, folded tablecloths, and 2 crates of local whiskey Clara had bought on credit. A single yellow bulb hung from the ceiling, making the space look more tired than it was. Silas crouched near the damp floor, pressed 2 fingers against the wood, then checked the doorframe. "Seal's gone," he said. Snow's packing outside and melting through. Can it wait? He looked at the stacked boxes. Not if you like inventory. I'm developing a complicated relationship with inventory. He glanced back at her. Move anything paper first. They worked without much talk. Clara carried receipt boxes and napkins into the main room. Silas moved heavier crates away from the wall. Griggs stood in the doorway at first, then stepped aside when Clara came through with both arms full. The dog's body brushed her knee. Not by accident, she thought. Not exactly comfort, either. More like a reminder that she was not the only living thing in the narrow room. After 20 minutes, the worst of the supplies were moved. The storm pressed softly against the back wall. Silas found a scrap board, wedged it against the lower frame, and packed cloth along the gap as a temporary fix. Clara leaned against a shelf, breathing harder than the work deserved. You should sit, Silas said. I sit, I think. That dangerous? Tonight, yes. He did not push. For a while, the only sounds were the bulb humming and Griggs breathing near the door. Then Clara said, They're not wrong about everything. Silas looked up from the doorframe. She kept her eyes on the damp floor. The rumors. Some of them. He set the screwdriver down. Clara gave a short laugh without humor. That's the part people never know what to do with. They want you either innocent or ruined, clean or dirty, victim or liar. Something simple enough to hate or forgive. Silas did not speak. That helped. She folded her arms tight against herself, though the room was not especially cold now. I grew up in other people's spare rooms, she said. State homes, foster homes. Some good enough, some not. I learned early that a bed could be temporary, even if someone called it yours. Silas remained crouched by the door, one forearm resting on his knee. He did not look away, but he did not stare as if waiting for a confession either. When I got older, I worked whatever would take me. Diners, laundry, cleaning motel rooms, a warehouse for a while. She swallowed. Then there were months when the rent was due, and my body was the only thing anyone thought was worth paying for. The bulb hummed overhead. Clara hated the silence after saying it. Not because Silas filled it with judgment, because he did not fill it at all, and that left the words standing naked between them. I'm not proud of it, she said, but I survived it. And I'm tired of people acting like survival is only respectable when it looks clean from the outside. Silas looked down at his hands. They were scarred and rough, fingers nicked from tools and cold, one old line across the back of his right hand pale beneath the yellow light. Survival's ugly work, he said. Doesn't make it less work. Clara felt something in her chest loosen, so suddenly it almost hurt. Not forgiveness. She had not asked for that. Recognition. Silas picked up the screwdriver again, then set it down without using it. The place, he said. Why this? Clara looked through the storeroom doorway toward the main room. From where she stood, she could see one table, the edge of the bar, the glow from the stove. Years ago, in Spokane, there was a woman who ran a tavern smaller than this one, she said. I don't even know if she knew my real name. I came in one night because it was below freezing and I had nowhere warm that didn't cost something I couldn't pay. She rubbed her thumb against the seam of her apron. She gave me soup. Didn't ask why I looked the way I did, didn't ask who I was running from or whether I deserved help. Just put a bowl in front of me and told me the stove worked better if someone sat near it. A small smile came and went. I stayed until closing. She let me. That was it. No sermon, no rescue. Just a room where nobody asked me to explain myself before I got warm. Silas understood then why the chalkboard line had caught him.
No questions required.
For Clara, it was not branding. It was a debt. "The lantern rail is not me pretending I was never anything else," Clara said. "It's me trying to build the kind of room I once needed." Griggs came closer and lowered himself beside her boots. Clara looked down at him. His silvered muzzle rested near the toe of her boot, eyes half closed, body angled toward the door. Silas watched the dog. For a moment, grief rose in him so sharply that he nearly stood and left. Griggs had done that for Malcolm. In safe houses, on transport floors, beside broken walls where exhaustion made men look younger than they were. The dog had always known where to place his body, between his handler and the world, between sleep and danger, between the living and whatever might come through the door. Now he lay beside Clara as if some part of the old duty had been rewritten. Silas reached toward the flashlight clipped to his belt before he realized he had moved. His thumb found the scratched metal cap, the initials MD, almost smooth from years of touch. Clara noticed. "Who was MD?" she asked quietly. Silas's hand stilled. She seemed to regret the question immediately. "You don't have to answer." That should have been the end of it. Instead, Silas said, "Malcolm Dane." The name changed the room. Not because Clara knew it, because Silas did. He leaned back against the shelf opposite her, the damp door between them forgotten for the moment. The yellow bulb swung slightly in a draft, making the shadows move over his face. "He was Griggs's handler before me," Silas said. "My closest friend. Closest thing I had to family." Clara said nothing. Silas looked toward the dog. "Last deployment went bad. Port security operation. Too many moving parts, bad intelligence, radio interference. We got split." The words came slowly, as if each had to be taken from a locked box and inspected before being handed over. "Malcolm was pinned. Griggs tried to go for him. I held him back." Griggs's ear twitched at Malcolm's name. Silas's jaw tightened. "Radio cut in and out. I heard Malcolm say to hold position. Keep the dog back. Protect the rest of the team." He stopped, breathing once through his nose. "I did what he ordered." "And he died," Clara said softly. Silas nodded. The bluntness did not offend him. Anything gentler would have been worse. "Afterward, the reports didn't line up. Some men said they never heard the order. Some said I waited too long. Some needed a reason that wasn't bad luck and bad command and too much smoke. They chose you. I was alive. That isn't a crime." "No," Silas said. "But people punish it like one." The words came out rougher than he intended. Clara looked at him for a long time. Not with pity, not with the eager sympathy of someone relieved to find another wounded person. She looked at him the way he had looked at the damp floor, assessing damage without calling the whole structure ruined. "Do you think you did the wrong thing?" she asked. Silas almost smiled at the cruelty of how honest the question was. He preferred it to kindness. "Every day," he said. Clara's eyes did not move from his face. "But if I'd gone after him," Silas continued, "Griggs would have followed. The rest of the team might have been exposed. More men could have died. Or maybe not. That's the thing that gets its teeth in you. You don't get to know the other version." He looked down at Griggs. "Malcolm told me to hold him back. I held him back. And then I brought the dog home." For the first time since Clara had known him, Silas looked old. Not weak, not broken, just tired in a place strength could not reach. "What did people say?" she asked. "That I left him." "Did you tell them about the order?" "Yes." "And they didn't believe you?" "Some did. Not enough."
Clara nodded slowly. People like the version that lets them sleep. Silas looked at her. She had not told him he was innocent. She had not offered absolution as if she had the right to hand it out. She had simply recognized the machinery. That was more dangerous than comfort. The draft pushed at the door again. The temporary cloth shifted, letting in a thin blade of cold air. Silas looked at it and stood. This won't hold overnight. Clara seemed grateful for the return to something fixable. What will? Plywood outside. Sealant tomorrow. Tonight, weight and plastic if you've got it. I've got tarp. Good. They worked again, but the room had changed. Not healed, not easy. Changed. Clara fetched tarp from the main room. Silas cut it to size with a folding knife and braced it along the bottom of the door. Griggs followed them out, then settled near the stove as if satisfied the storeroom no longer required his full attention.
When the temporary patch was finished, Clara made coffee. Not as a transaction this time. She set 2 mugs on the bar, then sat on the customer side instead of standing behind it. Silas hesitated before taking the stool 2 spaces away. After a moment, Clara slid 1 mug toward him. No whiskey, no tab, no performance of normal, just coffee. They drank in silence for a while. Outside, snow gathered against the window ledges. Inside, the tavern held its warmth with effort. There was something honest about that, Silas thought. Warmth did not mean the cold had vanished. It meant someone kept feeding the stove. Clara wrapped both hands around her mug. For what it's worth, she said, I don't think either of us need strangers to forgive us for surviving. Silas stared into his coffee. A lesser sentence would have been easier to dismiss. He did not answer because he did not trust his voice. Griggs rose from the stove and came to him. The dog pressed his head against Silas's knee, heavy and certain. Then, after a moment, he turned and looked at Clara. Not asking, not choosing one over the other, simply including her in the circle. Clara's eyes shone, but she did not cry this time. Silas rested his hand on Griggs's neck, fingers sinking into the thick fur, and felt the old dog breathe beneath his palm. The room remained quiet. No one was saved. No past was washed clean. But for the first time in a long while, Silas sat in a warm place after dark with another person who knew what it meant to be named by the worst thing anyone had heard about you. And neither of them asked the other to explain why they were still alive. Travis Morrow did not return to the lantern rail with raised fists. That would have been too simple, and men like Travis disliked simple when subtle still served them. After opening night, he and Marianne Vale moved through Cedar Hollow the way cold moved through bad insulation, quietly, invisibly at first, then everywhere at once. Nothing looked criminal if you studied each piece alone. A delayed delivery, a missing signature, a postponed inspection, a polite warning from someone who had never before cared about safety codes. The first sign came from the whiskey supplier in Livingston. Clara was wiping down the bar late on a Monday morning when the phone rang. The man on the other end sounded embarrassed before he had finished saying hello. "Shipment's going to be delayed," he told her. "How delayed?" "Hard to say." "You said it left yesterday." "It was supposed to." "Was there a weather issue?" A pause. "Not weather exactly." Clara held the receiver against her ear and looked around the quiet tavern. The stove was off, the chairs still turned upside down on 2 tables she had not finished cleaning. Through the front window, Cedar Hollow looked bright and harmless beneath noon snow. "What exactly?" she asked. Another pause. "Clara, I don't want trouble. I'm a small outfit." There it was. Not an explanation, a confession wearing a coat. She thanked him because she did not know what else to do, and hung up without raising her voice. 2 days later, an envelope from the town office arrived with a notice for an additional safety review.
The letter said the review was routine. Clara read it 3 times and found nothing routine in the timing. She had already filed every permit, paid every fee, and passed the first inspection before opening. Now, after Travis had been asked to leave her tavern in front of witnesses, the town suddenly needed to ensure continued compliance with district hospitality standards.
Hospitality standards.
Clara nearly laughed. Then she sat down behind the bar and pressed the heel of her hand against her chest until the feeling passed. By Thursday, anonymous posts began appearing on the community message board online. She did not look at first. Edith told her not to. Jonah told her people who posted without names deserved to be ignored with tools. Roy, passing through for coffee, said the road was easier to read than the internet, and twice as forgiving. Clara looked anyway. Is this really the kind of business Cedar Hollow wants near the historic rail district? Families visit here. Reputation matters. Some people move towns because the last one learned who they were. No one wrote her name in the first post. By the third, they did not need to. She kept opening the tavern. That became her answer. She made soup. She brewed coffee. She wiped the same tables, checked the same cash drawer, restocked the same shelves with fewer supplies than she needed. Every ordinary action felt like lifting a weight someone else had tied to her wrists. Clara was not afraid of work. Work had never been her enemy. Work was honest, even when it was hard. What wore her down was the old familiar math. Do everything right. Keep every paper. Smile carefully. Pay on time. Stay quiet. And still, someone with cleaner hands could reach into your past and pull a chain tight around your throat. On Friday night, the back window broke. It happened after closing. Clara had gone upstairs to the small room she rented behind the tavern and was sitting on the edge of the bed with her boots still on when she heard the sharp crash below. For one breath, she did not move. Her body knew too many kinds of fear and sorted them quickly. Not a dropped glass, not the stove settling, not snow sliding off the roof. Glass. She went down, holding a cast-iron poker from beside the stove. The back room window had a hole through one corner, and snow drifted in around the broken teeth of the pane. A rock lay on the floor among the glass. Wrapped around it with twine was a scrap torn from one of her printed menus. No questions required had been circled in black marker. Below it, someone had written, "We have questions." Clara stood there until the cold reached her socks. Then she called Harlan Pierce. The sheriff arrived 23 minutes later in a brown department parka, hat pulled low, boots too clean for the alley behind the tavern. Harlan Pierce was 54, broad in the middle, with a clean-shaven face that looked more tired than unkind. His eyes were gray-blue and evasive, especially when he had to say something he knew would land badly. He took pictures of the window. He picked up the rock with a gloved hand. He wrote notes in a small black notebook, slowly, as if speed might create responsibility. "Could be kids," he said. Clara stared at him. "There are no children in this story, Sheriff." He blinked at the sharpness, then cleared his throat. "Teenagers, then. Drunk out-of-towners. Hard to say. It was wrapped in my menu. I see that. With a message. I see that too. Then say what it is." Harlan looks down at the rock again. "Harassment, maybe? Vandalism, for sure. Maybe?" His mouth tightened. "Clara, I can write this up. I will. But unless someone saw who threw it, you know who wants me gone. I know what you believe." That sentence was worse than a refusal. Silas heard the rest from the doorway. He had come in through the front with Griggs beside him, later than usual, carrying a small paper bag from Mabel's, and the same canvas tool roll he seems to bring now without admitting he intended to use it. He stops just inside the back room, taking in the broken glass, the cold air,
The rock. Clara's white-knuckled grip on the poker. Harlan's notebook. Griggs went still.
Harlan noticed the dog first, then Silas.
Harrow. Pierce. There was no warmth in either name. Harlan turned back to Clara. For your own safety, you might consider closing a few nights, just until things settle. Clara lowered the poker slowly. Silas saw the meaning strike her before she spoke. Harlan did not say leave. He did not say give them what they want. Men like Harlan rarely used the cruelest words directly. They placed them on the table wrapped in concern and hoped someone else would unwrap them. So I close, Clara said. They learn it works. I'm saying tensions are high. Because someone broke my window? Because people are upset? People? Harlan looked toward the floor. Silas felt an old anger move behind his ribs, cold and familiar. He had heard versions of Harlan's voice in rooms with flags and sealed folders. We need more context. We need to consider all angles. We cannot assign blame without certainty.
Phrases polished smooth by men who did not want to stand near the blast. Silas did not raise his voice. "That window get written up as vandalism?" he asked. Harlan's pen stopped. "Yes." "And the note?" "Evidence." "And opening night?" "I wasn't there." "Roy has video." "I know." "You ask for it?" Harlan's jaw shifted. "I will." "When?" The sheriff looked at him then, and for a moment the tiredness in his face hardened into pride. "I know how to do my job." Silas held his gaze. "Then do it before someone decides she's easier to move hurt than scared." Clara looked at Silas, not because the words were kind. They were not. They were grim, and perhaps too close to something neither of them wanted named. But they were also the first words that treated the danger as real without treating her as weak. Harlan closed his notebook. "I'll increase patrols around the rail district," he said. It sounded like a compromise. It also sounded like a man trying to leave before he had to choose a side. After he went, Silas boarded the broken window from the inside. Jonah brought scrap plywood an hour later after Silas called him. He grumbled the entire time, mostly about the quality of old window frames, and partly about the decline of human decency, though he never named which bothered him more. Clara helped sweep glass. This time she did not cry. That worried Silas more. The next afternoon, the stove began smoking. At first it was only a faint backdraft, a bitter curl that made Clara wrinkle her nose when she opened the firebox. She had not lit a full fire, only tested the draw after the room stayed stubbornly cold. Still, the smoke did not rise the way it should. Edith was the one who said, "Call Mina." Clara hesitated. "I can't keep calling people every time something—" "Call Mina," Edith repeated, in the voice she used when pastry, weather, and foolishness had all reached the same conclusion. Mina Caldwell arrived 40 minutes later in a gray work truck with Caldwell Heating and Electric stenciled on the door. She stepped out wearing a black technical jacket, dark work pants, and a knit cap with a small clip light fastened to the brim. She was 49, compact and strong, with short black hair threaded with silver and hands that looked as if they had never waited for permission to fix anything. She listened to Clara's explanation without interrupting, then looked once at the stove. "Don't use it," Mina said. "I haven't." "Good. Keep not using it." Silas was there by then, replacing the temporary board over the back window with something sturdier. Griggs lay near the front door, head up, tracking Mina's movements with interest but no alarm. Mina crouched by the stove, checked the pipe, then went outside into the alley. Silas followed. Clara came after them, pulling her coat tight. Behind the tavern, snow had drifted high against the wall. Mina shoveled enough to reach the vent area, then stopped. "Well," she said.
Silas stepped closer. Several wooden crates had been dragged near the vent, partly hidden beneath a stiff tarp frozen into the snow. One crate lay broken against the wall. The tarp had been pulled up and packed in such a way that it did not fully seal the vent, but it blocked enough air to make the draw unreliable. Mina pointed with her flashlight. That didn't wander there. Clara looked at the crates. Could the wind have? No. The answer was flat. Silas looked toward the alley entrance. Tire tracks had been softened by fresh snow. Too late to read clearly. Mina's face remained practical, but her eyes had gone hard. You run that stove long enough with this half blocked, smoke comes back inside. Maybe worse, depending on conditions. Clara's arms folded across her chest. Was it meant to hurt me? Mina looked at her, then at Silas. Can't prove intent from a tarp, she said.
But whoever did it either knew enough to be dangerous or didn't care enough to be harmless. That sentence stayed with Clara all day. By evening, the weather turned. A storm rolled down from the mountains in bands of white that thickened fast after sunset. Mina had cleared the vent and told Clara not to use the main stove until she could return with a replacement section and test everything properly. Clara agreed. She meant it, but fear had a way of making people return to places they should leave alone. Near 9, after Edith had insisted Clara sleep at her place and Clara had insisted she would, in a minute, she remembered the lease folder under the bar, the supplier invoices, the notebook with her accounts, and the backup copies Silas had told her to make. The back window was boarded but not secure enough for her peace. The alley felt exposed. The tavern felt both threatened and hers. She told Edith she was going to lock up properly and get the papers. Edith offered to come. Clara said no. That was pride. She knew it before she reached the door. The lantern rail was dark when she entered, except for the small lamp behind the bar and the emergency light above the back hall. Wind pressed snow against the front windows. The room smelled faintly of old smoke, despite Mina's clearing. Clara gathered the lease folder, her green cloth-bound notebook, and the cash ledger. The main room was cold. Too cold. She hesitated by the small auxiliary heater near the back, the one tied into the old venting system but separate from the main stove. Mina had said not to use the stove. Had she said not to use the heater? Clara tried to remember the exact words and found only exhaustion. She turned it on low. Just for a few minutes, she told herself. Long enough to sort the papers, shut the water line, and leave. At Jonah's garage, Silas discovered the missing tool roll when he reached for the flashlight. His hand closed on empty air. He checked the truck. Then the bench by the snowmobile. Then the counter. Griggs watched him with growing impatience. "Don't look at me like that," Silas said. Jonah, wiping his hands with the red shop rag, glanced over. "Lose something?" "Tool roll." "You've got 6. The one with Griggs's meds." "And?" Silas did not answer. The old metal flashlight was in that roll too. Malcolm's flashlight. MD scratched near the cap. Silas had left it at the lantern rail after boarding the window. Jonah noticed the change in his face and, for once, did not make a joke. "Storm's getting mean," he said. "I'll be quick." Men say that right before making work for search crews. Silas was already pulling on his gloves. "Tell them to spell my name right." Griggs reached the truck before him. The road into the rail district had nearly vanished beneath blowing snow. Visibility came and went in lungfuls. The pickup's headlights caught white, then darkness, then white again. Griggs stood braced in the passenger seat, nose lifted toward the narrow gap where Silas had cracked the window to keep the glass from fogging. "You wanted a ride," Silas muttered. "Enjoy it." Griggs did not sit. As they neared the old rail buildings, the dog's body changed. Silas felt it before he looked. The shift from alert to urgent, the tightening of muscle, the forward lean. Griggs's ears pinned, then rose.
He gave one sharp bark, not at the road, but toward the tavern. Easy. Another bark. Silas slowed. The lantern rail was dark except for a small light behind the bar. Snow blew across the porch in low sheets. No car sat out front, but Clara's sedan was tucked near the side alley, nearly hidden by drift. Silas's pulse changed. He parked crooked near the curb, engine still running. The moment he opened the door, Griggs lunged out, not away from him, but toward the back of the building. "Griggs!" The leash snapped tight in Silas's hand. The dog pulled hard, nose working the air.
Then Silas smelled it. Not much. A thin, bitter thread beneath the storm. Smoke. He ran. Behind the tavern, the boarded window rattled in the wind. The back door was shut, but light leaked faintly beneath it. Griggs scratched once, then barked in a deep, furious rhythm that struck the wood like a fist. Silas pounded on the door. "Clara!" No answer. He tried the handle. Locked. Inside, something clattered. Silas did not think of Harlan, did not think of Travis, did not think of reports, radios, or the long, terrible distance between the living and the unreachable. He thought only of the space in front of him. Door. Lock. Smoke. Dog. Person inside. He pulled the pry bar from the truck bed with hands that had gone steady. The first strike split the old frame near the latch. The second tore the lock plate loose. Griggs shoved forward before the door had fully opened, barking into the smoke. The back room was hazed white, not flames. Smoke, thickest near the ceiling, but rolling low enough to sting Silas's eyes. Clara was on her knees near the bar entrance, one hand braced against the floor, coughing so hard she could not stand. The folder lay open beside her, papers scattered. Silas crossed the room low, grabbed her under the arms, and lifted. She tried to say something. "Don't talk." Griggs circled once, barking toward the main room, then came back to Clara's side, pressing his shoulder against her leg as Silas half-carried, half-dragged her through the broken back door and into the alley. The cold hit them like water. Clara folded forward, coughing. Silas kept one arm around her and guided her toward the pickup. Snow struck his face. Griggs stayed so close Silas nearly tripped over him twice. "In," Silas said, opening the passenger door. Clara collapsed onto the seat. Griggs jumped in after her before Silas could stop him, and pressed his body against her knees, trembling with adrenaline. Silas reached to pull him back. Griggs growled. Not at Clara, at Silas. It was brief, shocked, and gone almost as soon as it began, but it froze Silas where he stood. Griggs had never growled at him like that. The dog's amber eyes met his, fierce and pleading at once. "Stay with her." Silas heard it as clearly as if the words had been spoken. He shut the passenger door and ran around to the driver's side. The heater was already blowing. He grabbed his phone and called Harlan, then an ambulance, then Jonah, because Jonah would come faster than both and bring tools instead of questions. Clara coughed into her sleeve, eyes streaming. "I turned it on," she rasped. "Just for a minute." "The heater?" She nodded, then coughed again. Silas looked through the windshield at the tavern, its back door hanging broken, smoke thinning into the storm. This had not been a clean murder plot. No villain standing over a fuse, no dramatic confession. Just crates moved where they should not be. A vent compromised, a system not yet repaired, a woman too tired and afraid to leave her papers behind. That was what made it worse. Some harms did not require intent as much as permission. Permission granted by indifference, pressure, cowardice, and the belief that certain people could be pushed until whatever happened next was their fault. Red and white lights arrived, blurred by snow. Harlan stepped out of his cruiser with his hat pulled low, face tight when he saw Clara in the truck and Silas standing beside the open door. Behind him, the ambulance turned carefully near the curb.
Jonah arrived almost at the same time in his garage truck, swearing before he had both boots on the ground. The paramedics checked Clara, gave her oxygen, asked questions she could barely answer. She was not unconscious, not dying. That should have made Silas feel relief. Instead, his hands began to shake. He stepped back from the ambulance and looked down at them as if they belonged to someone else. Cold, he told himself. It was not cold. It was memory. White smoke, broken radio, a body he could not reach, Griggs pulling against restraint, Malcolm's voice ordering him to hold position. The impossible arithmetic of who could be saved and who could not. Only this time, Griggs had pulled him toward someone living. This time, the door had broken. This time, his hands had reached her. Clara sat on the ambulance step with an oxygen mask lowered for a moment, blanket around her shoulders. Griggs stood in front of her, leash dragging, refusing to move more than a foot away. One of the paramedics tried to guide him aside. The dog planted himself. Clara's fingers closed lightly around the leash. "Let him," she whispered, voice raw. Silas stood several feet away, snow gathering on his shoulders, breathing like a man who had just climbed out of a place far older than the storm. Clara looked at him. "He knew," she said, barely loud enough to hear. "He knew we had to come back." Silas's throat tightened. He looked at Griggs, the dog Malcolm had trusted, the dog Silas had mistaken for a living punishment, the dog now standing guard over a woman who had no claim on him except need and kindness. For years, Silas had thought Griggs existed to keep the past breathing beside him. But under the ambulance lights, in the snow outside the smoke-stained tavern, he understood something he should have known sooner. Griggs was not guarding a grave. He was guarding whoever was still alive. Silas looked from the dog to Clara, then to the broken back door of the lantern rail. Its lamps were still glowing weakly through the smoke, stubborn and blurred. Maybe he had not come too late this time. The thought frightened him more than the smoke.
The lantern rail did not open the next day. For the first time since Clara May Winslow had unlocked its door as a business owner, the front windows stayed dark past 4 in the afternoon. No chalkboard stood outside with soup and coffee written in white. No warm light spilled across the porch boards. No smell of bread or wood smoke drifted into the rail district. Only plywood covered the broken back door where Silas had forced his way in, and a strip of yellow tape fluttered near the alley whenever the wind caught it. By morning, the smoke had cleared from the tavern. What remained was worse in some ways. The sour smell in the curtains, the gray film on the walls near the back hall. The papers Clara had dropped and Silas had gathered into a careful stack after the paramedics took her away to be checked. She had not gone to the hospital. She refused after they cleared her lungs and told her to rest somewhere warm, away from smoke and stress. Edith Palmer had heard that instruction and treated it as a legal order. So Clara spent the first day after the accident wrapped in a blanket on Edith's sofa above the bakery, breathing through a raw throat and listening to the old woman bang around the kitchen below as if punishing every pot for what had happened. "You are not going downstairs," Edith called up every few hours. "I didn't say I was," Clara answered once. "You thought it loudly." Clara almost smiled, but her chest hurt when she tried. Across the street, Silas worked. He arrived before 9 with Griggs beside him and a tool belt riding low over his dark coat. Jonah Pike came 10 minutes later in his garage truck, carrying plywood, 2 lengths of weather stripping, a box of screws, and an expression that suggested he blamed poor carpentry for most human evil. Mina Caldwell followed in her gray work truck, already wearing her clip light even though the sky was bright. The three of them did not discuss whether they were helping. They simply began. Jonah replaced the back door frame with rough efficiency, muttering that if a door can be kicked in by a man over 60, it wasn't a door, it was a suggestion. Silas ignored that while measuring the split jamb and fitting a stronger strike plate. Mina pulled the vent assembly apart, tested the draft, checked the auxiliary heater, and installed 2 new carbon monoxide detectors, one in the back hall, one near the bar. Griggs supervised from the threshold. Every time someone walked into the alley, the shepherd rose. Not aggressively, not theatrically, just enough to remind the world that this place now had a witness who did not care about town politics. By noon, Jonah had found something. "Silas," he called from behind the building. Silas came around the corner, wiping his hands on a rag. Mina crouched nearby, studying the lower storage lock. Jonah pointed to the snow-packed ground near the back shed. That lock didn't fail from weather. The small exterior storage shed stood a few yards from the back entrance, half hidden by drifting snow and a leaning fence. Clara used it for empty crates, spare firewood, salt, tarps, and things she did not need inside every day. Its padlock hung closed, but twisted. The hasp bent just enough to make the damage easy to miss unless a person knew what undamaged metal looked like. Mina touched the hasp with a gloved finger. Pride. Not forced all the way open, maybe. Enough to get in. Jonah looked at the crates near the vent. So somebody gets in, drags these over, throws the tarp, breaks a window later, and everyone calls it bad luck. Silas stared at the lock. Bad luck had carried too much weight in his life. It had stood in for bad orders, bad courage, bad men, and bad silence. He was beginning to hate the phrase. "Photograph it," he said. Mina was already taking out her phone. They called Harlan Pierce. The sheriff came in the early afternoon, stepping carefully through the alley's snow, his brown parka zipped to his chin. He looked older in daylight than he had under emergency lights, not weaker, just more aware that the ground beneath his neutrality had begun to crack. Mina showed him the lock, the displaced crates, the marks near the vent, and the angle of the tarp frozen into the old snow. She did not embellish. Mina Caldwell did not need drama. She had measurements. "This was moved," she said. "You can see where the crate edges cut into the snowpack before the last fall covered part of it. This tarp was tucked against the vent, not blown. I can write that up." Harlan wrote in his notebook, slowly. Jonah made a sound of disgust. "You going to write until spring, Pierce?" Harlan glanced at him. "I'm documenting." "You documented Clara right into an ambulance last night." The words landed hard. Silas expected Harlan to snap. Instead, the sheriff's face closed, not in anger, but in something closer to shame. "I'm doing what I can prove," Harlan said. Silas looked at him from beside the back door. "Then start proving faster." Harlan's pen stopped. Silas did not raise his voice. That made it worse. "There are people who use 'need more time' as a broom," he said. "Sweep enough under it, maybe the person making trouble gets tired and leaves." Mina looked down. Jonah stopped wiping his hands. Even Griggs seems to go still. Harlan met Silas's eyes for a moment, then looked away toward the boarded window. "That what you think I'm doing?" he asked. "I think you're scared of being wrong," Silas said. "And I think she's paying for it." No one spoke after that. Harlan closed his notebook, but this time he did not put it away. "I want copies of everything," he said to Mina. "Photos, written statement, timeline. Jonah, if your garage cameras catch any part of the alley road, I need the footage." Jonah blinked once, surprised by the directness. "Camera's old." "I said I need it. I didn't say it had to win awards." For the first time that morning, Jonah looked almost approving. News moved through Cedar Hollow by dinner. Not accurately, never accurately. Some said Clara had nearly died. Some said Silas had saved her from a fire.
Some said Travis's men had been seen behind the tavern, though no one could say by whom. Others said Clara had staged the whole thing for sympathy, which proved that cruelty did not require evidence, only appetite. But the tone changed. Not everywhere, not enough. A few people still avoided the rail district. A few shook their heads in the diner and said trouble seemed to follow certain kinds of people. Mary Ann Vale told two women outside the town office that everyone should wait for verified facts before making emotional assumptions. And both women nodded because Mary Ann had the kind of voice people mistook for authority.
Yet something had shifted. Edith placed a handwritten sign in her bakery window before lunch the next day. Bread, rolls, and pies available here. Soup and coffee returning soon at the Lantern Rail. If that bothers you, there are other bakeries in other towns. There were no other bakeries in Cedar Hollow. That was the point. Roy Kessler called from the interstate and told Clara, in his rumbling, road-worn voice, that he knew half a dozen drivers who preferred a warm table to a clean reputation. "We'll stop when you reopen," he said. "You don't have to make a fuss." "I don't know if I can handle fuss." "Good. Truckers aren't fuss. We're weather with boots." Clara laughed, then coughed, and Edith confiscated the phone. Mina wrote her report that evening. It was short, plain, and difficult to dismiss. Vent access partially obstructed by relocated materials. Storage lock shows signs of prying. Tarp placement inconsistent with wind drift. Use of heating system under those conditions could cause smoke backdraft and possible carbon monoxide exposure. Jonah brought the garage footage to Harlan on a thumb drive and warned him it was grainy enough to embarrass everyone involved. Still, in the corner of the frame, near midnight on the night the window broke, a dark pickup passed the rail alley, slowed, and turned off its headlights for 14 seconds. The plate was unreadable, but the truck had a dented rear quarter panel and a missing left mud flap. Harlan knew that truck. So did Jonah. It belonged to a man named Wade Sutter, who did odd jobs for Travis Morrow and drank enough at the diner to tell stories he should not. By then, Mary Ann Vale had scheduled a community meeting. Officially, it was about the future of the historic rail district. Unofficially, everyone knew it was about Clara. The meeting took place in the old town hall, a brick building with tall windows that leaked cold air and a portrait of the town founder hanging crooked above a row of folding chairs. Snow boots squeaked on the floor. Coats steamed faintly as people settled in. Near the front stood a table with a pitcher of water, a stack of printed agendas, and Mary Ann's silver snowflake pin catching the light every time she moved. Clara almost did not go. Edith stood in the doorway of the bakery apartment, arms crossed. "You don't owe them your throat before it's healed." Clara wore a dark green sweater, jeans, and her old coat. Her voice was still rough from smoke. Her face looked pale, but her eyes were clear in a way Edith did not like, because it meant the decision had already been made. "If I stay home," Clara said, "they get to talk about me like I'm furniture. They do that anyway. Then I should at least be in the room." Edith's mouth tightened. Downstairs, Silas waited beside the bakery door with Griggs. He did not ask if Clara was sure. She appreciated that more than she expected. The walk to town hall was short and bitter cold. Griggs moved between them and the street, not guarding in the old, obvious way, just present, a black and tan shape against the snow, steady enough that people on the sidewalk moved aside without quite knowing why. Inside town hall, conversations dipped when Clara entered. She did not look down. That cost her more than anyone knew. Mary Ann began with a smile and the soft voice of a woman used to being thanked for harm delivered politely. "We all care deeply about Cedar Hollow," she said. "Growth is not the enemy of tradition, but growth must be thoughtful.
Our rail district has an opportunity to become a destination for families, winter travelers, and responsible businesses that reflect our values. Values, Clara thought, were often just preferences with better clothes.
Travis stood near the side wall in a navy blazer and open-collared shirt, hands folded, expression solemn. He did not look at Clara often. That told Silas the man was worried. Marianne continued. She spoke of investment, tourism, safety, and reputation. She never said Clara's name until she had to. Instead, she used phrases like recent incidents, concerns about suitability, and the kind of atmosphere we wish to encourage. Then she invited public comment. For a moment, no one stood. A man near the back raised his hand. He was red-faced, heavy through the shoulders, and wore a cap with a construction company logo. "I just think," he said, not looking at Clara, "some businesses bring certain elements. Folks have a right to know what kind of place is opening in their town." A few murmurs followed. Clara stood. The room quieted too fast. Silas saw her hand brush the front of her coat where her green notebook would normally be. She had not brought it. Maybe on purpose. Maybe because tonight she did not want to read her courage from paper. "My name is Clara Winslow," she said. Her voice came out rough, but it carried. "I rent the lantern rail legally. I filed for my permits legally. I pay my bills, though lately some people have made that harder than it needs to be. I serve soup, coffee, bread, and local whiskey. I keep my books. I clean my floors. I don't sell anything to anyone underage. I don't run card games. I don't hide criminals in the pantry." A few people shifted. Clara's fingers curled once, then opened. "I have done things in my life I would not choose again," she said. "Some of them kept me alive when I had no family, no money, and no warm place to go. I am not going to give you details so you can decide whether my suffering was respectable enough." The room went very still. Marianne's smile had disappeared. Clara looked around at the faces watching her. Some guilty, some curious, some closed. "You do not have to like me," she said. "You do not have to eat my soup. You do not have to believe I belong here. But you do not get to decide that a person is trapped forever in the worst chapter you heard about them." Silence followed. Not applause. Not yet. Something better than applause, maybe. Attention. Then Travis spoke from the wall. "No one is judging your past, Miss Winslow." Edith scoffed so loudly that 3 people turned. Travis ignored her. "But Cedar Hollow deserves transparency. Investors deserve confidence. Families deserve to know that businesses in key areas reflect community standards." Silas stood. He had not planned to. That was what frightened him afterward. The chair legs made a quiet sound against the floor. Griggs rose with him, then sat again at his side, his notched ear forward. Silas felt the room turn toward him. He had spent years avoiding that weight, letting people believe whatever story required the least from him. Silence had been easier than proving he was not the man they wanted him to be. Tonight, silence felt like standing outside a locked door while smoke filled the room. "I know something about community standards," Silas said. His voice was low, but the hall carried it. "People used that phrase around me after a man died. They didn't call it gossip. They called it concern. Didn't call it blame, called it questions. Sounded cleaner that way." No one moved. "Malcolm Dane was my friend," Silas said. "He gave an order I followed. He died anyway. Some people needed that to be my failure because random loss is hard to live with. A villain is easier." His hand closed once at his side, then released. "I let them have their story because I was tired.
because part of me believed surviving was already a kind of guilt. And because if people make you a ghost long enough, you start saving them the trouble. Clara looked at him. Silas did not look back. If he did, he might stop.
"I won't stand here and prove my whole life to a room that came for someone else," he said. "And Clara Winslow shouldn't have to either. If you have evidence of a crime, bring it. If you have concerns about wiring, ask Mina. If you don't like the soup, don't eat it. But don't dress up cruelty as values and call it civic pride." The words landed without flourish. Griggs sat beside his boot, calm as stone. A man near Travis muttered, "That dog doesn't make her respectable." Griggs lifted his head. He did not bark. He only looked at the man. Somehow that was worse for the man than a growl would have been. The room saw him shrink from the gaze of an old dog, and no one could pretend not to. Mina stood next. She did not address the room. She addressed Harlan, who sat near the aisle with his notebook open. "I submitted the vent report. You have the photos. Jonah gave you footage. Roy Kessler has video from opening night. You have enough to stop calling this neighborly disagreement." Roy, who had driven in despite bad roads, raised his hand from the back row. "I'll give my statement tonight." Jonah added, "And Wade Sutter's truck is in that footage. Don't ask me how I know. I fixed the heap." A murmur moved through the hall. For the first time, Travis lost control of his face. Only for a second, but Silas saw it. So did Harlan. The sheriff closed his notebook. That small sound carried. "I'm opening a formal investigation," Harlan said. The room shifted again. "Into the vandalism at the lantern rail, the interference with the venting system, the incident on opening night, and any related intimidation." Harlan looked toward Travis then, not long, but long enough. "Anyone with information can speak to me after this meeting." Marianne's voice cut in, still soft but thinner now. "Sheriff, surely we should avoid turning a community planning session into—" "A criminal matter?" Harlan asked. Marianne stopped. Harlan looked tired. He also looked, perhaps for the first time in years, properly ashamed of how long it had taken him to get tired. "If a crime happened," he said, "then it already is one." That ended the meeting, though not officially. People stood in awkward clusters. Some avoided Clara. Some approached her with clumsy words that were not quite apologies. Edith intercepted the worst of them, with the skill of a woman who could defend a doorway using only a stare. Travis left without speaking to Clara. Marianne followed slower, chin lifted, her snowflake pin bright against her pale coat. She had not been defeated. People like Marianne did not fall in one night. But the shine had come off her certainty, and in Cedar Hollow, that mattered. Outside, snow had begun again. Clara stood on the town hall steps, breathing carefully in the cold. Silas came out beside her with Griggs. "You didn't have to say all that," she said. "No." "Why did you?" He looked toward the rail district where the lantern rail sat dark but still standing. "Door was open," he said. Clara frowned faintly, not understanding at first. Then she did. A door had been open. A room had been filling with smoke. Silence had become another kind of locked latch. Silas put on his gloves. "I can fix the back door tomorrow," he said. "Jonah can check the generator. Mina wants to test the detectors again. Griggs and I can walk by most nights." Clara looked at him through the falling snow. "You're making a list." "Lists help." "What are you not saying?" Silas glanced down at Griggs, then back at the old rail buildings. "I'm not promising I can stop everything." "I didn't ask you to." "I'm saying I can show up." For Clara, that was more dangerous and more valuable than any promise.
She nodded once. That's enough. Across the street, Edith called that if they intended to freeze dramatically, they could do it after eating stew.
Griggs turned immediately at the word eating. For the first time in days, Clara laughed without coughing. It was not victory, not yet. The investigation had only begun. Travis still had money. Marianne still had influence. Cedar Hollow still had people who preferred whispers to truth. But as Clara looked toward the dark shape of the lantern rail, she no longer saw only broken glass and smoke. She saw a door that could be repaired. She saw lights that could be lit again. And beside her, in the snow, stood the first few people who had stopped watching from outside. The night the lantern rail reopened, the sky was clear enough to feel impossible. For nearly a week, storms had come down from the mountains one after another, burying the rail district in white and turning every road into a narrow argument between tires and ice. Cedar Hollow had moved through those days with its chin tucked into its coat, roofs sagging under snow, chimneys smoking hard, porch lights glowing like small acts of stubbornness. Then, as if winter had finally exhaled, the clouds broke. By late afternoon, the sky had turned a deep, clean blue over the pines. Stars appeared early above the ridge, bright and sharp. Snow still lay high along the curbs and against the old depot wall, but the wind had softened. The kind of cold that remained was honest cold. It bit, but it did not shove. Clara Winslow stood beneath the porch of the lantern rail with both hands tucked under her arms, looking at the sign. It hung straight. More than straight, solid. Silas and Jonah had rebuilt the bracket with a dark iron frame that looked too practical to be pretty and too well made to fail soon. Jonah had insisted on overbuilding it because, as he put it, gravity has more patience than people. Silas had not argued. He had measured twice, drilled once, and tightened each bolt until the old sign sat firm above the door. The lantern rail. The letters were still weathered. The paint still showed age. Clara liked that. She had no interest in making the place look untouched. Untouched things did not know how to welcome the tired. Behind her, Edith Palmer arranged a tray of hot rolls on the bar, as if setting them down for inspection by a hostile government. Mina Caldwell stood on a step stool near the back hall, pressing the test button on the new smoke detector. It answered with a sharp beep that made Griggs lift his head from beside the stove. "Good," Mina said. "I like a thing that complains when it's supposed to." Jonah, carrying a toolbox toward the door, muttered, "Then you must love people." "I like machines better." "Same." Clara heard them and smiled before she could stop herself. It had been days since that felt natural. The tavern did not look new after the repairs. It looked mended. The back door had a stronger frame now. The broken window had been replaced with glass that caught the lamplight cleanly. The smoke smell had faded beneath pine cleaner, coffee, soup, and Edith's bread. Clara had scrubbed the walls until her shoulders ached, then stopped when Silas took the rag from her hand and said, "Enough. A room can smell like work." She had let him take it. That was new too. At 6, Roy Kessler came through the door with 2 other truckers, both large men with weathered faces and the careful cheer of people who spent too much time on dangerous roads. Roy stamped snow from his boots and sniffed the air. "Heard the soup here is better than the truck stop," he said. Clara stood behind the bar in her white shirt and honey-brown apron, her voice still faintly rough but steady. "Depends which truck stop. The one where the cook hates joy." "Then yes, better." Roy grinned. 3 bowls. Edith leaned toward Clara. "Charge them extra for flattery." Slowly the room filled, not crowded, not bursting with sudden public devotion, but filled enough. Jonah took a table near the wall with coffee. Mina sat at the bar and ate soup like a woman who considered silence a form of seasoning. 2 snowplow drivers came in after their shift. The post office woman returned, shyly, with a folded apology she never quite managed to hand over. A couple from the ski rental shop came too, speaking too brightly at first, then settling when Clara did not punish them for leaving early that terrible opening night. Some people did not come, Clara noticed. A man she had seen in the diner walked past the window, slowed, looked in, then kept walking. 2 women crossed the street before reaching the tavern door. No one from Marianne Vale's circle appeared. Travis Morrow's truck did not pass the rail district at all. Once, that would have hollowed Clara out. That night, it only hurt. There was a difference. Hurt could be carried. Hollowing left no hands to carry with. Silas arrived after the first bowls had gone out. He did not stand in the doorway as long as he used to. Griggs entered ahead of him, shook a dusting of snow from his coat, and made a slow circuit of the room. The German shepherd's black saddle gleamed in the lamplight. The silver around his muzzle had become more visible in winter, and the notch in his ear caught the glow whenever he turned his head. Clara had placed a folded gray blanket near the front window for him. Griggs sniffed it once. Then he took the edge gently in his teeth and dragged it across the floor toward the stove. The room watched. Jonah said, "Dog has sense." Edith said, "More than half the town." Griggs placed the blanket between Silas's usual corner and the warm brick of the stove, circled twice, then lowered himself with a long sigh that seemed to come from somewhere older than his body. Silas stood still for a moment, looking at the dog. Clara saw the change in his face. Not surprise, exactly. More like a door opening inside him that had been swollen shut for years. He did not sit in the corner. Instead, he took the chair near the stove, the one where Griggs could lie between him and the room without keeping his back to the warmth. Clara brought him coffee before he asked. "No whiskey?" he said. "Not tonight." He looked up. She set the mug down. "You look like coffee." "That bad?" "That present." He did not answer, but his hand closed around the mug as if accepting the word. The night moved gently after that. Not perfectly. Ordinary nights never were. Clara dropped a spoon. One trucker complained the soup was too hot, then asked for another bowl. Edith accused Jonah of eating rolls faster than a man with a conscience should. Mina adjusted the back hallway detector one more time because she did not trust anything installed under pressure. Roy told a story about a mountain pass in Wyoming that made everyone in the room colder just listening to it. And through it all, the lamps stayed on. That became the miracle, if there was one. Not that everyone forgave. Not that truth arrived with trumpets. Not that Travis was dragged through the street, or Marianne confessed to cruelty, or the town learned decency overnight. The lamps stayed on. The investigation continued. Wade Sutter had spoken to Harlan after Jonah identified his truck. He claimed he had only been paid to scare her some and move a few things. He insisted he had not meant for anyone to get hurt, which might even have been true in the shallow way careless men understood harm. The supplier in Livingston had admitted Travis's office had called, warning that Clara was unstable and likely to default. An investor from Bozeman had paused talks with Travis until the rail district matter was resolved. None of it fixed the broken parts at once, but it loosened the grip around the lantern rail. It gave Clara room to breathe. Over the next few weeks, the tavern became what Clara had wanted it to be before anyone else had tried to name it. A winter room. A place for soup, coffee, low music, clean glasses, local whiskey, and no forced explanations. She added a smaller sign beside the chalkboard near the door. No questions required. Warm seat available. The line made some customers smile. Some read it and looked away. Some sat down because of it. Silas began opening boxes at his cabin. He did it on a morning when Griggs refused to leave the bedroom doorway until Silas looked at the old footlocker under the bed. The dog did not bark. He simply stood there, occupying space with the patience of a creature who understood that men often needed to be herded toward themselves. Silas pulled the locker out. Inside were things he had not touched in years. Folded uniforms, field notebooks, 2 photographs with corners softened from handling, a small packet of letters he had never mailed, and Malcolm Dane's old leather dog collar from before Griggs had been issued the heavier canine gear. The leather was dark and worn, the brass ring dulled by time. Silas sat on the floor for a long while with the collar in his hands. Griggs came over and sniffed it. The dog did not whine, did not paw at it. He touched his nose to the brass ring, then rested his head on Silas's knee. That was when Silas understood he had mistaken memory for punishment, because punishment was easier to understand. Memory did not require him to bleed forever. That evening he brought the collar to the lantern rail, wrapped in a clean cloth. Clara was behind the bar, writing supply numbers in her green notebook. She looked up when he entered, saw the cloth in his hand, and closed the notebook without asking. Silas placed the bundle on the bar. "It was Malcolm's," he said. Clara waited. Griggs wore it before deployment gear, before all of it. She touched the edge of the cloth, not the collar. "Do you want it somewhere safe?" He looked toward the stove, where Griggs was already settling onto his blanket. "Somewhere not hidden." Clara nodded. The next day she found a small wooden box at the second-hand store near the church. It had a cracked lid, but Jonah fixed the hinge. Edith lined the bottom with a piece of clean blue cloth. Clara placed it on the shelf near the stove, not in the center of the room, not like a shrine demanding attention, but close enough for warmth. Malcolm's collar went inside. A week later, Roy left a highway coin from a route he had driven for 30 years. Mina placed a burned-out fuse from her first service truck, laughing at herself as she did it. Edith added one of her husband's old recipe cards, then threatened to haunt anyone who read it without permission. A snowplow driver left a broken key from the winter he survived a rollover outside Helena. The box did not make the lantern rail sad. It made the room honest. People carried things. That was not tragedy. That was proof they had loved, lost, traveled, failed, survived, and still needed a place to put their hands around a warm mug. One evening, Harlan Pierce came in without his uniform. He looked wrong in ordinary clothes. Gray sweater, old brown coat, jeans, boots still too clean. He stood near the door until Edith said, "Either come in or let the cold pay rent." Harlan came in. Clara was wiping the bar. Silas sat near the stove. Griggs lifted his head but did not rise. Harlan removed his hat. "Miss Winslow." "Sheriff?" "Not tonight," he said. "Just Harlan, if that's all right." Clara did not answer that directly. "Coffee?" "Yes, ma'am." She poured it. He held the mug for a while before drinking. "Investigation still open. Wade gave a statement. Not enough for everything, but enough for charges on vandalism and interference. Travis's lawyer is already making noise. Mary Ann says she knew nothing about the intimidation." "Did she?" Harlan's mouth pulled slightly. "Knowing and proving are different roads." "I've learned that." He looked down into the coffee. "I should have done more sooner," he said. Clara stilled. The tavern did not stop around them. A spoon clinked. Someone laughed quietly at a table. The stove ticked. That helped. Big apologies in silent rooms could feel like traps. Harlan continued. "I told myself I was being careful. Some of that was true. Some of it was cowardice wearing a badge. Next time someone is being pushed out, I won't advise them to make it easier." Clara watched him for a long moment. A younger version of her might have needed him to beg properly, might have needed him to name every harm in the right order, might have needed the apology to repair what it could not repair. Now she only said, Then make sure there is a next time where you do better." Harlan nodded. It was not forgiveness, exactly. It was not refusal, either. The winter continued. Silas and Clara never named what was growing between them. That made it stronger in some ways. Named things could be misunderstood, rushed, claimed by other people's expectations. What they had was quieter. He fixed the loose shelf behind the bar without being asked. She kept coffee ready when he came in from the cold. He brought firewood and stacked it where she could reach it. She learned to tell when his bad memories were closer by the way his thumb found the dented flashlight at his belt. He learned that when Clara grew too cheerful with customers, she was often tired enough to break in private, and he would quietly take out the trash or sweep the back hall so she could stand still for a minute. Griggs moved between Silas's cabin and the lantern rail as if both places were part of one patrol. At the cabin, he slept beside Silas's bed. At the tavern, he slept near the stove. And sometimes, when Clara sat late at a table with her notebook open, Griggs would rise, cross the room, and rest his silvering muzzle on her knee until she closed the book and breathed. Near the end of the month, the temperature dropped lower than anyone wanted to say aloud. Pipes froze in 2 houses. The road north closed before sunset. The sky turned a hard black over Cedar Hollow, and the snow underfoot squeaked like old hinges. That was the night Clara served free dinner. No announcement beyond a chalkboard outside. Cold night. Soup is on. Pay if you can. Sit if you can't. People came slowly. Not only the poor, not only the lonely in ways easy to see. A widower from the post office. A woman whose husband worked night shifts at the mill 2 towns over. Roy and 2 drivers, Jonah with his red shop rag still in his pocket, Mina with windburn across her cheeks, Edith, of course, pretending she had not baked enough rolls to feed a rescue crew. Silas stood outside on the porch for a few minutes before going in. Through the window he saw the room Clara had built, mismatched tables, warm bowls, tired faces loosening in lamplight. Griggs asleep near the stove as if no danger in the world deserved his attention just then. Silas thought of Malcolm. The thought came, and for once it did not knock the air from him. It stood beside him instead. He imagined Malcolm laughing at the sight of Griggs growing old in a tavern that served soup to stranded truckers and stubborn widows. He imagined the man shaking his head, saying, "Took you long enough, Si." Silas touched the scratched flashlight at his belt. Then he went inside. Hours later, after the last bowl had been washed and the last customer had stepped carefully into the cold, Clara locked the front door. Jonah had gone. Mina had taken the long way home to check on a neighbor's furnace. Edith's bakery lights clicked off next door one by one, until only the lantern rail remained awake on the block. Silas helped Clara lower the front blinds. Griggs, who had chased a loose scrap of paper onto the porch and returned with snow on his muzzle, sat between them. His ears were relaxed. His eyes were half closed. He leaned first into Silas's leg, then turned his head and pressed lightly against Clara's hand. Outside, Cedar Hollow lay quiet under the snow. Not innocent, never that, but quieter now in a way that did not feel like erasure. Silas looked up at the porch awning. A thick lip of snow had gathered along the edge. "I'll check that tomorrow," he said. "If it freezes, it'll pull the gutter loose." Clara followed his gaze. "Tomorrow, then." "Need a roof rake." "Do we have one?" "I do." She smiled. "Of course you do. It's a useful thing." "I'm learning you own many useful things." He looked at Griggs, then at the warm room behind them. "Not all of them are things." Clara's smile changed. She did not answer quickly. That was one of the reasons he had come to trust her. She let words keep their weight. Finally, she said, "Winter is long here." "It is. Good thing there's work to do." Silas looked through the window at the tables, the stove, the small wooden box near the hearth, and the old sign hanging firm above the porch. For most of his life, tomorrow had been a place he reached by endurance. Now, for the first time in years, it looked like something a man could plan for. Griggs gave a soft huff, as if the matter had been settled long before either of them understood it.
The three of them stood together beneath the light of the lantern rail while snow gathered quietly around their boots. No one had been saved by a miracle. No hidden fortune had appeared. No speech had washed the past clean. The dead remained dead. The guilty still made excuses. Some people in Cedar Hollow would never come through Clara's door. But the tire had been changed on the lonely road. The sign had been straightened. The door had been rebuilt. The stove had been made safe. A bowl of soup had been placed before someone who needed warmth. An old dog had refused to leave. And under the long Montana winter, the light stayed on. Sometimes healing does not arrive as a grand miracle. Sometimes it comes as a warm room in the middle of winter, a bowl of soup offered without judgment, a loyal dog refusing to leave, or one person choosing to show up when it would be easier to walk away. Silas, Clara, and Griggs remind us that the past may leave scars, but it does not have to decide where we belong forever. God's grace often works quietly, through small acts of courage, mercy, and faithful presence. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you'd like more stories of loyalty, healing, and second chances, please consider subscribing. May you find peace in the places where life has been heavy, and may a light stay on for you when the road feels cold.